Chapter 1084. Jun Yi-xia wanted Han Yunxi to walk in alone. This was the biggest joke in the world. What did he take the men present for? Forget about Long Fei Yi, Gu and Gu Beiyue. Even Tang Li wouldn't let Han Yunxi walk in alone. Long Fei Yi looked at Jun Yi-xia coldly and didn't want to answer him. Gu Beiyue didn't say anything either. Ning Qing sneered. Gu narrowed his long and narrow eyes and said word by word, Jun Yi-xia, you're thinking too much. Tang Li snorted coldly. Jun Yi-xia, other than bullying women, what else do you dare to do? If Jun Yi-xia had enough hostages, he would have brought all the hostages here and let Long Fei Yi and the rest enter Tiger's prison. Unfortunately, he didn't. He only had Ning Qing. Faced with Long Fei Yi and the rest's contempt and mockery, Jun Yi-xia could only endure. He looked at Han Yunxi and sneered, Han Yunxi, it looks like you don't have any sincerity in saving them. Not sincerity. If she didn't have sincerity, would she and Long Fei Yi have left the two armies on the northern expedition and come here personally to take the risk? Even when facing Ning Qing, Han Yunxi didn't want to explain too much. At this moment, Ning Qing was looking at her. His gaze was trusting and respectful. Jun Yi-xia's provocation was superfluous. Ning Qing wasn't that stupid. Who knew that Jun Yi-xia would suddenly kick Ning Qing's knee? Ning Qing immediately knelt down. Jun Yi-xia raised his leg high and stepped on Ning Qing's shoulder, pressing him down forcefully. He said coldly, men, bring a torch. If it was a match, it would take some time to ignite the gunpowder, but if it was a torch, it could be ignited at any time. Han Yunxi said angrily, Jun Yi-xia, how dare you? Do you think I wouldn't dare? Jun Yi-xia increased the force of his leg, and Ning Qing's shoulder collapsed under the weight. He seemed to be trying his best to hold on, but he clearly didn't have much strength left. He kept looking at Han Yunxi. His naturally cold brows were tightly furrowed. He kept shaking his head, telling her not to come over. Han Yunxi knew that he had been poisoned, and it was a very complicated poison. The detoxification system had been checking him urgently, but it hadn't detected the detailed situation yet. Han Yunxi, are you coming in or not? Jun Yi-xia asked again. He pulled out a dagger from his waist with his other hand. He leaned over evilly, exerting all his strength on Ning Qing's back. The tip of the dagger was pressed against Ning Qing's other shoulder. Han Yunxi, you don't have to come in. If you kill him, this prince still has another hostage. You have plenty of time to slowly think about it. This prince, wait. Jun Yi-xia smiled as he gently pierced Ning Qing's clothes with the dagger. Han Yunxi's eyes emitted a terrifying killing intent. At this moment, she wanted nothing more than to tear Jun Yi-xia into pieces. Gu Beiyue, how confident are you? Long Fei Yi asked in a low voice. I'm not confident. Gu Beiyue answered honestly. If it was a moment ago, perhaps he was 70 to 80% confident that he could snatch the hostage from Jun Yi-xia's hands. But now, Jun Yi-xia was holding a torch, not a match. Moreover, Jun Yi-xia's dagger was already pressed against Ning Qing's shoulder. Right now, he only had 50% confidence. He didn't like to take risks, especially at a time like this. 50% confidence was zero to him. If he didn't take risks and stayed in a stalemate, he might still have a chance. If he took risks and lost, he and Ning Qing would both be killed. Moreover, no one could predict whether the explosion of the gunpowder on Ning Qing's body would endanger the courtyard behind them, or what kind of casualties it would cause. How could Gu not have the same thought? The situation they were facing now was completely different from what they faced at the top of Heaven Mountain. Gunpowder didn't allow for the slightest bit of risk. Moreover, those people from Evil Sword School were afraid of death. Junie Xia seemed to be prepared to die together with them. From the moment they saw Ning Qing being escorted over, they had been assessing the risk of saving him. Once goose thorny vines sprang out from under Junie Xia's feet, who knew if Junie Xia would choose to die together with them? At this moment, Junie Xia's dagger suddenly pierced Ning Cheng's shoulder. Ning Qing silently endured it. He was still looking at Han Yunxi and shaking his head. Cold and indifferent, Han Yunxi looked on indifferently. However, her heart was already burning with anger. Junie Xia was ruthless. He suddenly pulled out the dagger and blood splattered everywhere. Then, he stabbed it again. Ning Cheng looked at Han Yunxi from afar, motionless. Han Yunxi was expressionless. Her eyes were unfathomable. Han Yunxi, haven't you thought it through? Why don't this prince change the hostage to play with? Junie Xia looked at Tang Li with interest. Is it Ning Jing or that child? Tang Li didn't say anything. He clenched his fists and stared at Junie Xia. They were all enduring and waiting. Perhaps Junie Xia would bring out the hostages. At that time, they would have a better chance of winning. But who knew that Junie Xia suddenly changed his mind? Forget it, forget it. Ning Cheng's life is tough. He pulled out the dagger and pressed it against Ning Cheng's ear. He chuckled and said, Han Yunxi, do you want this ear, or, I'll go over. Han Yunxi finally couldn't take it anymore. Junie Xia, you just want my life. Let go of Ning Qing. I'll go over. Han Yunxi said coldly. At her words, Ning Cheng's calm gaze suddenly turned sharp and fierce, almost ferocious. Even though he couldn't speak, anyone could tell that he was fierce to Han Yunxi. He was warning Han Yunxi. Wasn't this woman always smart, calm, and ruthless? Can't she tell that Junie Xia's true target is her life? She came in to court death. Once she came in, Junie Xia would definitely ignite the gunpowder. Junie Xia would never let them go. If she didn't come in, she could live, and so could he. Junie Xia would never dare to leave the tiger's den. How would Han Yunxi know that Ning Jing and the rest were no longer in Junie Xia's hands? Junie Xia had hostages to kill slowly. However, there was only one Ning Qing in this world. They only had one Ning Qing, and the D clan only had one Master Ning. She had no choice but to take the risk. Han Yunxi, are you crazy? Long Fei Ye's voice was terrifyingly low. He held her hand tightly, not allowing her to take a step forward. Do you want to see Ning Qing die? Han Yunxi asked calmly. If you don't go in, Ning Qing won't die, Long Fei Ye said. Are you 100% sure? Han Yunxi asked. No. I'm only 50%. Only 50%, Long Fei Yi answered honestly. He wasn't 100% sure because Junie Xia still had several hostages. Moreover, the remaining hostages, whether it was Mu Ling, Ning Jing, or that child, were more of a threat to them than Ning Qing. The possibility of Junie Xia killing Ning Qing was indeed very high. However, Long Fei Yi still didn't want to take the risk. He said, if you go in, it'll be even harder to save the others. The best way was to continue the stalemate with Junie Xia and let him bring all the hostages out. It would be best if they could lure him out of Tiger's den. Han Yunxi understood Long Fei Ye's considerations. She said, Long Fei Yi, why don't we take a gamble? Junie Xia won't leave Tiger's den. Since it's a risk and we're not confident, why should we sacrifice Ning Qing? If they continued the stalemate, they weren't 100% sure that they could see all the hostages, lure Junie Xia out, and protect Ning Qing. If they went in, they weren't confident that they could save everyone and escape unscathed. Actually, both choices were risky. Why would they choose the stalemate? Why would they choose to watch Ning Qing get tortured and even the other hostages get tortured? Long Fei Yi was silent, but he still didn't let go. Gu Beiyue, Gu, and Tang Li were very quiet. This choice was too big. It concerned everyone's life and death. Even Tang Li didn't dare to act rashly. Han Yunxi whispered again, "Everyone, if we act immediately after entering, will we have a higher chance of success?" They were still 2 to 3 meters away from Tiger's Denver. If they entered the courtyard, would they have a higher chance of success? I'm still not 100% sure. At most, I'm 70% sure. Gu Beiyue had already considered this problem. I'm 70% sure too, Gu answered. Long Fei Yi, what do you think? Han Yunxi's face was cold and stern as she asked in a low voice. Long Fei Yi didn't answer Han Yunxi's question. He said directly, "Gu Beiyue, I'll leave Ning Qing to you. Tang Li and Gu, go save the others. Junie Xie, leave him to us." After he finished speaking, he didn't let Han Yunxi walk by herself. Instead, he held her hand and walked forward. Gu Beiyue and the other two immediately followed. Ning Qing didn't expect Long Fei Yi to not stop Han Yunxi and come over personally. He immediately glared at Long Fei Yi. His gaze was full of warning. But who knew that Long Fei Yi would let him glare at him and remain indifferent? At this moment, Ning Qing was unable to restrain his anger. How could Long Fei Yi do this? How could he bring Han Yunxi here to die? How could he bring everyone here to die? Ning Qing began to struggle. He really wanted to tell them the truth. He wanted to tell them that Junie Xie only had one bargaining chip. But no matter how much strength he used, he couldn't move. Junie Xie had him firmly restrained. Junie Xie looked coldly at Han Yunxi and the other 4 people approaching step by step. His lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile. This was the result he wanted. It couldn't be any better if all of them came over. Junie Xie felt all the blood in his body boil as he tightened his grip on the torch and made his final preparations. As soon as Han Yunxi and the rest crossed the threshold, he would ignite the gunpowder on Ning Cheng's body. His subordinates would also detonate the gunpowder hidden around Tiger's prison. Who cared about the ups and downs of Cloud Realm Continent? Today, he, Junie Xie, would bury the 2 masters of Eastern and Western Qin with him. He had no glory in life, but in death, his name would be recorded in the annals of history for all eternity. The torch in Junie Xie's hand burned brightly. The guards hidden around them all blew on their torches and placed the flames near the fuse of the gunpowder. Everything was ready. Han Yunxi and the rest advanced step by step until they were very, very close to the gates of Tiger's prison. 10 more steps and they'd be there. Junie Xie's smile grew wider and wider while Ning Cheng's eyes grew more and more despaired. Junie Xie stared at Han Yunxi's footsteps as he silently counted down. 10, 9, 8, suddenly. Chapter 1085. Suddenly. A familiar voice came from behind Han Yunxi and the others. This voice was, "Qi brother. Qi brother." Gu Qishao's first reaction was to turn back and be stunned by the scene behind the curtain. This was definitely the scene that Gu had the deepest impression of Mu Ling, so far. Mu Ling was holding a baby in swaddling clothes, riding on the back of a huge white tiger, leaning in the arms of a tall man. Even though the only person she acknowledged, Han Yunxi, was present, even though Long Fei Yi, who she was afraid of, was also present, she only had eyes for him. She was clearly crying, but she smiled at him. She smiled as if all the flowers in the world had bloomed. She smiled as if the years would be peaceful and beautiful from now on. She smiled as if everyone who saw her would unconsciously forget all their troubles and smile with her. This kind of smile was called happiness. Even if it was just seeing Chi brother, Mu Ling, was happy. She smiled with tears streaming down her face. Chi brother, Ling, missed you so much. Chi brother. Ling, finally got to see you. Everyone was stunned. Even Jun Yixia and Ning Qing in Tiger Prison Courtyard were very surprised. They never thought that Mu Ling, and Deacon Jean would appear at this moment. Ning Chang's eyes finally rekindled with hope. Mu Ling, and Deacon Jean were here. Jun Yixia's plot would definitely not succeed. Definitely not. Jun Yixia was stunned. He had already counted to 8. 7 more steps. 7 more steps, and he would be able to kill Long Fei Yi and all of them. Why? The snakes had already been poisoned to death, and the surrounding archers did not dare to shoot without Ning Chang's orders. The tigers suddenly rushed over. They were still stunned. They did not know how the tiger and these 2 people came over. In fact, when Han Yunxi used poison to attract the poisonous mosquitoes and snakes, causing a commotion in the mountain, Deacon Jean and Mu Ling knew that reinforcements had arrived. Deacon Jean quickly discovered that the guards in the forest had all retreated to Tiger Prison. He knew that this was the best time for him to escape with Mu Ling. However, he still came over with Mu Ling. It was not for anything else, but because Mu Ling promised her something. If it was any other time, someone would have noticed that Mu Ling's long hair was missing. However, at this moment, no one had any extra thoughts. Everyone was surprised and pleasantly surprised. Tang Li's attention was all on the child in Mu Ling's arms. Before Mu Ling could speak, Tang Li rushed over. Child. My child, right? Yes. Mu Ling quickly handed the child to Tang Li. Tang Li was so surprised that he did not know what to do. He even forgot to reach out to take the child. Take it. Mu Ling jumped down from the tiger's back with the child in her arms. Tang Li, this is the daughter that Sister Jing gave birth to for you. Hurry up and hold her. Tang Li suddenly froze. He did not reach out his hand, but muttered, "Where's Ning Jing?" Why were there only Mu Ling and Deacon Jean? Where was Ning Jing? Shouldn't Ning Jing be the one holding the child? Where was Ning Jing? Ling, what's going on? When did you leave Tiger's prison? Where's Ning Jing? Han Yunxi asked loudly. Long Fei Yi and the others also retreated. Gu Beiyue and Gu Jun brought up the rear. One was on guard against Jun Yixia in Tiger's prison, while the other was paying attention to the movements of the surrounding archers. After all, there was an additional child, so they had to be more cautious. Sister, Jin Zi saved us. Jin Zi knows the art of animal taming. He saved us, but they met a mysterious person. Jin Zi and I escaped with the child. Sister Jing, Bai Yuqiao, and little Yu, We don't know where they are, Mu Ling said anxiously. Deacon Jean glanced at Tiger's prison and sneered, "It seems that you were deceived by Jun Yixia." This time, everyone was even more shocked. When they did not see Ning Jing earlier, they thought that Ning Jing was still trapped in Tiger's prison. Who knew that the truth was like this? Jun Yixia actually deceived them like this. At this moment, Jun Yixia realized that the child was not Mu Ling's, but Ning Jing and Tang Li's. He was completely deceived by Bai Yuqiao. However, Jun Yixia did not have time to think about this matter at this time. His attention was all on Deacon Jean, who was riding on the tiger's back. He finally knew who saved Mu Ling and the others. He finally knew who stole the big white tiger that he had tamed for many years. He finally knew who was much more talented in animal taming than him. It was him, Deacon Jean. Why? Why? He was just a slave of the Winter Crow clan. How could he? Who are you to the Black clan? Long Fei Yi asked in a cold voice. Although Mu Ling only said that Deacon Jean knew how to tame beasts, Deacon Jean was sitting on the white tiger at this moment. It was the white tiger that Bai Yuqiao mentioned in the letter. In other words, Deacon Jean was controlling the tiger tamed by Juni Xia. The Black clan was an old subordinate of the East Qin imperial family. Long Fei Yi understood the Black clan better than the other nobles. The Black clan's animal taming technique was a kind of talent. Every generation, every person's talent was different. Those with the Black clan's direct bloodline had the highest talent in animal taming. The tiger was the king of the mountain, one of the beast kings. Those who could tame the tiger had to have top talent. Moreover, the tiger that Deacon Jean tamed was one that Juni Xia had already tamed. He controlled Juni Xia's tiger to betray Juni Xia. In other words, Deacon Jin's animal taming technique was far superior to Juni Xia's. If Juni Xia was the Black clan's direct bloodline, then what was Deacon Jin's relationship with the Black clan? No matter what, Deacon Jean was more honorable than Juni Xia. As long as Deacon Jean was here, Juni Xia did not have the qualifications to be the Black clan's patriarch. Long Fei Ye's question was also what Juni Xia wanted to ask. Deacon Jean replied, "Who I am is not important. What's important is that I have already sent Mu Ling and the child here. Return the slave contract to me." Although his words were very rude, they made his position clear. Long Fei Yi did not ask any more questions. Instead, he said coldly, "Wait aside." Long Fei Yi turned to look at Juni Xia. The corners of his mouth curved into a sinister smile. Since Juni Xia only had one hostage, then Juni Xia had no right to negotiate with them. Tang Li was still in a daze. Han Yunxi took the child from Mu Ling's hands. She glanced at him and immediately handed him to Tang Li. "No news about Ning Jing is good news. 10,000 arrows are waiting to protect your child." At this moment, Tang Li came back to his senses and took the child with trembling hands. Little Tang Li was actually sleeping soundly in this illusion. As soon as Tang Li held her in his arms, the corners of her mouth curved into a pure and sweet smile. Tang Li's heart almost melted when he saw it. He did not know who little Tang Tang resembled. He had just come back to his senses, but when he saw little Tang Tang, he was immediately stunned again. He looked at little Tang Tang and smiled foolishly. His gaze was unbelievably gentle. Han Yunxi patted him hard on the shoulder. "Protect her." After she said that, she turned around and looked at Juni Xia. At this moment, Tang Li came back to his senses and hugged little Ning Jing even tighter. This was his and Ning Jing's daughter. She was his treasure and his life. Tang Li held his daughter in one hand and held a special crossbow in the other. He was on high alert. No matter how dangerous the surroundings were, he would not allow any harm to come to his daughter. Absolutely not. Deacon Jean rode on White Tiger and waited at the side. Mu Ling had already run in front of Gu. In the past, every time she lost Chi brother, she would look all over the world for him. When she found him, she would rush to him, stand in front of him, and stare at him. This time was no exception. In fact, this time, she really hoped that she could hug Chi brother. However, she did not. This was the bottom line of her love for him. In the past, Gu would let her stare as he went about his business. However, this time, Gu was also staring at her. He was a full head taller than her. He looked down at her with great interest and even slowly bent down to approach her. Mu Ling had never been looked at so closely by Chi brother. He had never looked at her with such a playful gaze, and he had never looked at her for such a long time. She, who had always been carefree, was a little embarrassed. Her ears immediately turned red. She was so embarrassed that she wanted to look away, but she could not bear to. At this moment, it was as if she and Chi brother were the only two people left in the world. Her cheeks flushed red as she continued to look into Chi Gija's eyes boldly. She saw that his eyes were filled with her. However, just as Mu Ling was enjoying herself, Gu's forehead suddenly bumped into Mu Ling's. "It hurts." Mu Ling blurted out. Gu immediately let go and said coldly, "Stupid girl, when did you get pregnant with Chi brother's child?" Mu Ling rubbed her forehead. Only then did she remember that matter. She burst out laughing. "People will believe you if you say that." She laughed. "Why?" Gu Qishao asked in a low voice. Mu Ling laughed even louder. "Because Chi brother looks like someone who would do such a thing." Gu gritted his teeth. He knocked Mu Ling's head and scolded her in a low voice. "Your reputation is ruined. Don't you want to get married? Chi brother, do you know that even if Ling's reputation is ruined, there are still people in the world who are willing to marry Ling? Chi brother, do you know that even if Mu Ling's reputation is ruined, she can't not marry and chase after you for the rest of her life? Chi brother, do you know that Mu Ling always thought that Ling would lose you, but this time, Ling lost herself. I don't want to marry. I don't want to marry. Chi brother, can Ling not marry?" Mu Ling murmured. Unfortunately, Gu didn't hear her. He ignored her and turned to walk to Gu Beiyue's side. He looked at Junie Xia. Deacon Jean looked at Mu Ling calmly. Seeing that Mu Ling was still standing there, he gradually became unhappy. Didn't this woman see that there were archers all around her? Didn't she see that Junie Xia and Long Fei Yi were at daggers drawn? Why wasn't she coming over? With her strength alone, could she fight against these archers? Just as Deacon Jean was about to speak, Mu Ling consciously walked back. She would definitely do what she had promised. Deacon Jean looked down at her from above. Although he was very unhappy, he still reached out to her. "Come up." Mu Ling sat on the tiger's back. Deacon Jean rubbed her forehead and whispered, "Does it hurt?" Junie Xia didn't know that the child was Ning Jing and Tang Li's. "I was too excited writing and didn't pay attention to the details." Chapter 1086. Did it hurt? Mu Ling had always been very strong, but when she heard the two words Deacon Jean, she suddenly felt very, very sad. Her forehead did not hurt. Her heart, however, hurt very, very much. Mu Ling did not make a sound. Deacon Jin's attitude softened and he also did not make a sound. He gently rubbed Mu Ling's forehead while paying attention to the surrounding archers and Junie Xia's situation. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, and Gu Beiyue stood in a line, standing 5 or 6 steps away from Tiger's prison. Junie Xia held Ning Qing, not moving at all. The atmosphere between the two sides became more and more tense. "Junie Xia, if you come out yourself, this prince can leave your corpse intact," Long Fei Yi said in a cold voice. Junie Xia was not afraid. "Long Fei Yi, come in if you have the skills. This king will release Ning Qing. Otherwise, this king will make him wish he was dead." Gu gave a cold laugh. "Junie Xia, do you think we're all idiots?" They were worried that Junie Xia had quite a few hostages. If they killed Ning Qing, he could use other hostages to threaten them. But now, Junie Xia only had Ning Qing in his hands. This also meant that Ning Qing was his last and only bargaining chip. Junie Xia did not want Ning Qing to die more than them. In this situation, how could they foolishly enter Tiger's prison and take a risk? Even a fool could see that Junie Xia had set a trap in Tiger's prison. Junie Xia did not have any advantage. Even if it was a battle of attrition, they could exhaust Junie Xia to death. Long Fei Yi was already too lazy to reply to Junie Xia. Gu Beiyue also did not make a sound. Suddenly, Junie Xia angrily shouted, "Someone, fire!" As soon as his voice fell, the archers on the left and right formed a semicircle, trapping Han Yunxi's group at the entrance of Tiger's prison. Tens of thousands of arrows were released, wanting to force them into Tiger's prison. Junie Xia doing this meant that there was something fishy going on in Tiger's prison. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi did not move. They both stared at Junie Xia. Gu Beiyue held his sword and blocked the arrows around them. With Gu Beiyue's speed, no matter how fast the arrows were, they would not be able to threaten Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi. Tang Li protected little Tang Tang. While dodging, he shot arrows to kill the archers. This crossbow was his latest invention. Although it was small, it was very powerful and its speed was top-notch. Other than the Chu family's imperial archers, there should not be any other archers who could be faster than his crossbow. Deacon Jean protected Mu Ling and dodged with the help of the white tiger. He used the tiger's speed to cut down several tricky arrows. Gu originally wanted to attack, but at this moment, he was staring at Mu Ling and Deacon Jean. This was because he noticed that Deacon Jean was hugging Mu Ling's waist. This stinky girl, when did she get together with Jean Zi, who came from an unknown background? Didn't this stinky girl chase after him all day long? Why did she suddenly have a change of heart? This was not like her. Having a change of heart was a good thing, but she could not be deceived by Jean Zi. Manager Jean didn't look like a good person at first glance. Could it be that this stinky girl was bullied or threatened by Jean Zi? Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi did not move because they knew that with Gu's ability, he could quickly deal with these archers. But who knew that Gu was actually in a daze? Long Fei Yi glanced at him and pulled out his sword. At the same time, Han Yunxi fiercely rushed forward and dealt with the archers together with Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue. They were not afraid that Junie Xia would run away. If Junie Xia ran out of Tiger's prison, that would be even better. Once Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi took action, Gu Beiyue did not need to defend anymore and took the initiative to attack. At the same time, Jean Zi also summoned a group of tigers over. In a short while, 1,000 archers were either dead or had escaped. It could be said that the entire army was wiped out. Long Fei Yi and the rest stood at the entrance of Tiger's prison. Junie Xia was already at the end of his rope. Who knew that Junie Xia suddenly burst out laughing, "Good. Extremely good. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, this prince will make a bet with you, how about it?" Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi did not make a sound. They knew that it was impossible to lure Junie Xia out. They could only force him out. Han Yunxi had thought of using poison but Ning Qing could not take it. When she walked closer, she then checked the poison in Ning Cheng's body. She discovered that the poison in Ning Cheng's body was very complicated. She even suspected that Junie Xia wanted to turn Ning Qing into a poison man. Ning Qing would take a new poison every day. The next day, half of the antidote would come to detoxify him and he would be poisoned with a new poison. Several slow-acting poisons accumulated together. When one poison acted up, if Ning Cheng's body could withstand it, he would most likely become a poison man. If he could not, then he would die. Ning Cheng had already taken the antidote for several months. It was not that easy to detoxify the poison in his body. Until now, the detoxification system was still calculating the detoxification plan. She needed to get closer to him to calculate the best way to detoxify him. With Ning Cheng's body, she did not dare to casually use poison. If the poison she used caused all the toxins in his body to explode, the consequences would be unimaginable. What was the solution? If she did not think of a solution soon, Ning Qing would definitely suffer again. Han Yunqi did not want to see Jun Yixia abuse Ning Qing to threaten them. Who knew that the situation was much worse than Han Yunqi imagined? Jun Yixia, who was forced into a desperate situation, actually grabbed the fuse of Ning Cheng's gunpowder and pulled it out. What was he trying to do? Jun Yixia. Stop! Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi shouted at the same time. They never thought that Jun Yixia would do this. But Jun Yixia still lit the fuse. At this time, Ning Cheng's tightly knitted brows suddenly loosened as if he was relieved. He looked at Han Yunqi and his eyes revealed a smile of relief. He used this smile to tell Han Yunqi not to come over and goodbye. Gu Beiyue, Gu, save them. Long Fei Yi said coldly and was about to make a move himself. Hearing this, Jun Yixia broke into a soundless chuckle as he looked at them. Even if Jin Zi and Mu Ling'er came, so what? Long Fei Yi and the rest would still enter Tiger's prison. They couldn't escape. Who knew that in such an urgent situation, Han Yunqi would actually stop them? She said loudly, Jun Yixia, Jin Zi is the Black Clan's direct descendant. Actually, you're not. You've been deceived by Bai Yanqing. Do you want to know who you really are? Do you want to know what your relationship with Bai Yanqing is? When she said this, Jun Yixia was stunned. He knew that Jin Zi must be the Black Clan's direct descendant. He also knew that Jin Zi's bloodline must be nobler than his. So what? He was also the Black Clan's direct descendant. But Han Yunqi's words made him doubt himself. Especially when Han Yunqi mentioned Bai Yanqing, he couldn't help but doubt himself. Deacon Jean was stunned, but the flame did not stop. The flame continued to burn along the fuse and gradually burned towards the gunpowder bag. It burned faster and faster. Even if the fuse was stretched out by Jun Yixia, the fuse was still limited. Time was very, very tight. Actually, Long Fei Yi and the others didn't have much of a chance of winning when they first started, much less now. Han Yunqi had no room to retreat, and she didn't have time to hesitate. Even though she was very, very nervous, she still held on and calmed down. Her method was less risky than Long Fei Yi and the others. She said, Jun Yixia, Bai Yanqing lied to you. Is it worth it for you to fight with us? He might even be watching the show from the sidelines right now. These words completely agitated Jun Yixia. Jun Yixia abruptly grabbed the spark of the fuse and extinguished it with his bare hands. Seeing this, everyone heaved a sigh of relief, especially Han Yunqi. She didn't dare to stop. She gave Long Fei Yi a look and immediately said, Jun Yixia, you want the world, but do you know what Bai Yanqing wants? Actually, Han Yunqi didn't know who Jin Zi was at all. She also didn't know what Jun Yixia's status in the Black Clan should be. She also didn't know what Bai Yanqing's motive for stirring up the world was. Bai Yuqiao had told them that Jun Yixia had been tricked by Bai Yanqing, and Jin Zi's appearance made her know that Jun Yixia didn't have the noblest bloodline among the Black Clan's orphans. Han Yunqi purely used this information to raise some sensitive questions and make Jun Yixia mistakenly think that she knew the truth. Jun Yixia's temperament was extremely high, and he cared a lot about his face. Moreover, he hated Bai Yanqing so much. After being provoked by Han Yunqi, how could he not figure it out? What exactly does he want? Jun Yixia roared. Hee, Jun Yixia, you're so smart, but you don't know what he wants. Han Yunqi stalled for time and diverted Jun Yixia's attention. Gu Beiyue had been staring at the torch in his hand for a long time, and Long Fei Yi was ready to make a move at any time. When Junie Xia wasn't paying attention, as long as Gu Beiyue snatched the torch in his hand, and as long as Long Feiyi rescued Ning Qing from his hands, then everything would be over. At Han Yunxi's words, Junie Xia began to seriously ponder the matter. Long Feiyi and Gu Beiyue were still waiting for the best time. After all, this matter didn't allow any mistakes. Once Junie Xia found out that he was tricked by Han Yunxi, they wouldn't have another chance. At this time, Deacon Jean shouted, "Junie Xia, I'm the Black Clan's orphan, you're not. You're just." Deacon Jean didn't continue, but he successfully attracted Junie Xia's attention. Junie Xia looked at him. Long Feiyi and Gu Beiyue exchanged glances. Here's their chance. Gu Beiyue suddenly flew over, and Long Feiyi followed closely behind. Junie Xia came back to his senses and subconsciously held the torch tightly. Just as he was about to light the fuse, Gu Beiyue appeared in front of him out of thin air and grabbed his wrist. Junie Xia's other hand released the dagger and grabbed Ning Cheng's neck. Gu Beiyue's other hand immediately reached over and tried to pull his hand away. But Junie Xia's grip was unwavering. At this time, Long Feiyi arrived. Long Feiyi didn't hesitate and kicked Junie Xia's abdomen fiercely. Junie Xia spat out a mouthful of blood, but unexpectedly, he actually laughed out loud. Although Long Feiyi and Gu Beiyue didn't know what the ambush in Tiger's prison was, they knew that they had to get Ning Qing out of here as soon as possible. Long Feiyi pulled Junie Xia's hand that was grabbing Ning Cheng's neck and was about to pull it away. Suddenly, there was a loud bang and the entire Tiger's prison exploded. Chapter 1087. It exploded. Tiger's prison suddenly exploded. A huge cloud of smoke instantly engulfed Long Feiyi and the rest. In the blink of an eye, they had all disappeared. The torch in Junie Xia's hand had clearly been knocked away by Gu Beiyue. What was with this explosion? Long Feiyi, Han Yunxi cried out in shock. She allowed the dust and sand to fly towards her as she tried to move forward. "Poison lass, you're crazy," Gu roared. Soon, there was another boom and another explosion. This time, the explosion was much more powerful than the previous one. The entire Tiger's prison was completely engulfed. Han Yunxi was affected by the explosion and was sent flying. Just as she fell to the ground, she didn't know who suddenly pounced on her and protected her in his arms. She couldn't see anything. She could only hear the sounds of explosions ringing out one after another. She could only feel waves of heat surging towards her from behind. The explosions continued. Junie Xia's ambush in Tiger's prison was not for anything else but for gunpowder. Not only did he tie gunpowder to Ning Cheng's body, he even buried gunpowder in Tiger's prison. He wanted them to walk in so that they would perish together and die. Then wouldn't Long Feiyi, and Gu Beiyue and Ning Qing. Thinking of this, Han Yunxi immediately struggled to get up. However, the person behind her protected her tightly and pinned her down. "Let go!" she roared angrily. She didn't even realize how panicked and agitated she was. "Do you want to die? Don't move." The voice behind her was unusually sharp, but Han Yunxi could still tell that it was Gu's voice. This was probably the first and only time in her life that she had heard Gu's cold voice. After being yelled at by Gu, Han Yunxi finally regained her senses. That's right. Did she want to die? The explosions were still going on behind them. They were so close that they were lucky to be able to jump down in time and not be killed by the explosion. There was nothing they could do but wait. Han Yunxi stopped moving completely. All of the flying sand landed on Gu Qixiao's body as he propped himself up with a hand on the ground. His head was bowed, his beautiful face devoid of its usual smile. Instead, it was solemn and indescribably cold. With such a huge explosion, Long Fei Yi and the others were not only doomed, they were dead for sure. No matter how fast Gu Beiyue was, the most he could do was to protect himself. After an unknown amount of time, the explosions finally stopped. Gu stood up and shook the sand off his body. Han Yunxi was covered in dust even though she was protected by him. Moreover, her right shoulder was badly mutilated. She had just been injured by the explosion. At this moment, no one cared about their wounds. Han Yunxi and Gu were especially silent. They slowly turned around. How they wished that when they turned around, they would see a miracle on their familiar faces. However, the miracle did not happen. They did not even see Gu Beiyue. What they saw was a sea of fire. Tiger's prison had turned into a sea of fire. The fire was raging and the flames were soaring to the sky. Their souls seemed to be burning along with the fire in front of them. It was very, very painful. Deacon Jean protected Mu Linger while Tang Li carried little Tang Tang. They escaped in time and did not have any injuries. Only little Tang Tang was frightened and kept crying. When they rushed over and saw Tiger's prison turned into a sea of fire, they were all stunned. Everyone knew that there was an ambush in Tiger's prison, so they did not dare to go in together. However, they did not expect Jun Yixia to set up such an ambush. Jun Yixia did not even care about his own life. Only little Tang Tang's laughter could be heard in the huge gully. Her cries sounded especially desolate. Everyone came back to their senses. No one could believe that everything in front of them was real. Could they pretend that none of this had happened? Could they pretend that Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue were still standing with them, standing right beside them? Who knew how long they stood there in silence? Finally, Mu Linger could not help but burst into tears. How did this happen? How did this happen? Sob, sob. I don't believe it. I must be dreaming. I must be. Mu Linger's cries immediately triggered Han Yunxi's nerves that were on the verge of collapse. She slowly crouched down and buried her head in her knees as she sobbed. Even though there were so many people beside her, her gently trembling figure seemed so lonely and helpless. Long Fei Yi was gone. North Moon was gone too. Finally, Han Yunxi could not take it anymore. She sobbed. Gu stood beside her. He lowered his head and looked at her. He had no idea how to comfort her. Perhaps he could not even comfort himself. He crouched down and hugged the poison lass. He wanted to give her a hug that she could lean on for a while, but she continued to bury her head in her knees as she hugged him. Her sobs gradually grew louder and louder until she was heartbroken. In the end, Gu let go and looked to the side. Who would have thought that he would actually see a scene that left him utterly shocked and overjoyed? Heavens! There really was a miracle. The two of them had created another miracle. Long Fei Yi and Gu stood side by side in the distance. Both of them were covered in wounds, but they continued to stand ramrod straight. One of them was domineering, while the other was handsome. Long Fei Yi dragged the injured and battered Jun Yixia, while Gu Beiyue supported the unconscious Ning Qing. The gunpowder on Ning Qing had already been removed. Tang Li and the rest, who were standing behind them, were the first to see Long Fei Yi and Gu Beiyue. They were so surprised and excited that they could not speak. Gu Qixiao's stern face finally broke into his usual smile. It was even more brilliant than the midday sun. Only Han Yunxi didn't know a thing. She was still sobbing, her heart-wrenching sobs. Long Fei Yi threw the dying Jun Yixia to the side. He frowned and walked briskly towards Han Yunxi. He was already standing behind Han Yunxi, but Han Yunxi still did not know. If sorrow was the sea, she would have already sunk into despair. Long Fei Yi could not bear to see this woman cry. Whenever she cried, he would lose his cool. She wanted to say something, but he suddenly pulled her up and pulled her into his arms, hugging her tightly. Han Yunxi abruptly raised her head and saw the face she was most familiar with. Long Fei Yi, she exclaimed. Her eyes and face were full of tears. She was shocked and surprised. Long Fei Yi, you, she was so surprised that she could not speak. She did not want to say anything more. Like a little girl, she buried her head in his arms and cried. She did not know whether she was crying or acting coquettishly. Facing Han Yunxi like this, Long Fei Yi was completely at a loss. He could do nothing but hug her tightly. He could not say anything. His lips were gently on her hair, and he simply let her cry. Every hug could be very warm, but not every hug could comfort her. Gu Qishao arched a brow and turned to the side. He began to whistle lightly, his tune light and lively. Mu Ling only knew today that Han Yunxi could also have such a fragile side. She could also break down in an instant. She looked at Chi Brother from afar and unconsciously whistled along with Chi Brother's rhythm. She only found out recently that Chi Brother and herself were so similar. Han Yunxi did not cry for long. She quickly looked up from Long Fei Yi's arms and hurriedly wiped away her tears. Where's Gu Beiyue? Your Highness, your subordinate is fine. Gu Beiyue stood at the side and smiled. Ning Cheng is also fine. Han Yunxi heaved a sigh of relief. Tang Li asked anxiously, Gu Beiyue, you saved them alone. Gu Beiyue was fast, but if he escaped with so many people, how fast could he be? I could only escape with Ning Cheng. Your Highness, your subordinate is also puzzled. Gu Beiyue answered honestly. The explosion just now had started from the two sides in front of them. He had been holding Ning Cheng with one hand and Jun Yixia with the other. Although he also wanted to save Long Fei Yi, he could not do it. He knew that if he pulled Long Fei Yi with him, everyone would die. So, after he let go of Jun Yixia, he only brought Ning Cheng with him to escape. After they escaped from Tiger's prison, when the explosion started, he brought Ning Cheng to the ground and did not dare to get up. When the explosions ended, he found that Long Fei Yi was standing beside them with a wounded Jun Yixia. Long Fei Yi had several serious injuries, but Jun Yixia's injuries were even worse. What the Black Clan owes my East Qin imperial family, Jun Yixia has repaid it today. Long Fei Yi said. After the explosion, he knew that Gu Beiyue would choose Ning Cheng, who was closest to him. So, he grabbed Jun Yixia as a cover. Even if he escaped as fast as he could, he still could not get far from Tiger's prison. He lay down in a depression behind Tiger's prison and used Jun Yixia as a cover. Jun Yixia had several serious burns on his body, and there were also several wounds caused by the flying sand. Without his cover, these injuries would have all been on Long Fei Yi's body. At this moment, Jun Yixia was lying on the ground, bleeding a lot and on the verge of death. He did not even have the strength to raise his head. However, he heard Long Fei Yi's words. Why? Why? He stubbornly asked, Long Fei Yi, Great Qin has already been destroyed. This world belongs to the strong. Why do you want my Black Clan's loyalty? My Black Clan has long stopped owing your East Qin imperial family. This is the debt from back then. It was the Black Clan that betrayed my East Qin and instigated internal strife in Great Qin. Long Fei Yi said as he pulled out his profound frost sword and pressed it against Jun Yixia's neck, you still owe this prince a debt. Jun Yixia clearly remembered, but it was good that Long Fei Yi did not forget. Long Fei Yi fiercely slashed, ripping open Jun Yixia's clothes. He said, even if you die, you still have to pay this debt. Xia finally remembered this debt. To be more precise, this debt was what he owed Han Yunxi. Just as he was about to speak, Long Fei Ye's sword pierced through his back without hesitation. Long Fei Ye had been waiting to kill Xia for a very long time. Before coming to save him, he had already told Gu Beiyue and Gu that Xia could only die in his hands. Xia knew that he would definitely die today, but he did not expect that there would not even be a single person to accompany him in death. He struggled to look at Han Yunxi and asked, "Tell me. What kind of person am I to the Black Clan? Bai Yanqing. What exactly does he want to do?" Han Yunxi was just spouting nonsense. If only she knew what Bai Yanqing wanted to do. She coldly looked at Xia, not saying a word. Han Yunxi, you, tell me. Tell me. Xia used all his remaining strength to roar. Han Yunxi still did not answer, but Deacon Jean said. Chapter 1088. Deacon Jean said, Xia, I heard from Bai Yuqiao that you spent a few years to tame the white tigers. I only used 3 days to tame the 6 white tigers. I am the descendant of the Black Clan. When Deacon Jean said this, everyone looked at him suspiciously. Could it be that this guy already knew his identity? Xia stared at Deacon Jean with wide eyes. He was unwilling and unconvinced. Even the descendant of the Black Clan might not be able to tame the white tigers. Who could be sure about talent? How could Deacon Jean deny him based on this? Who knew that Deacon Jean would say, the descendant of the Black Clan has always lived in seclusion in the Winter Crow Clan and has never set foot in Northernly, Xia, I don't know who you are either. But let me tell you, there is absolutely no trash like you in the descendant of the Black Clan. At best, you are just an ordinary clansman of the Black Clan. When these words came out, Xia seemed to have suffered a great blow. He stared blankly at Deacon Jean, blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. Not long after, his head slowly fell to the ground. He slowly died just like that, with his eyes wide open. He must have never thought that he would end up like this. No one present was surprised by Xia's death. Because since they had come to save him, it was destined that either Xia would die or they would die. Everyone was curious about what Deacon Jean had just said. Just who are you? Long Fei asked coldly. I'm just a slave. Han Yunxi, give me back my indenture contract. Deacon Jean said snappily. His attitude seemed to dislike this group of people very much. In fact, he was usually like this. Cold to everyone, without much patience. Who are you in the Black Clan? Han Yunxi questioned. I said, I'm just a slave. Didn't you already investigate my identity long ago? Deacon Jean said again. Then why did you just say? Mu Ling couldn't help but speak up. Deacon Jean looked at Xia, who had died with his eyes wide open, and replied coldly, revenge, on purpose. When these words came out, everyone looked at Deacon Jean in a new light. They felt that this guy was sinister and cruel. But Gu Qishao only laughed out loud. Satisfying. I like it. As Gu Qishao saw it, if Manager Jean hadn't said those words on purpose, Xia would have died too easily. Of course, while he was praising Manager Jean, a hint of wariness flashed past his eyes. What did such a sinister, cruel, and vengeful fellow do to his little lass? Other than being casual with him, his little lass wasn't a casual girl. At this moment, Gu Beiyue interrupted everyone and said, Princess, take a look at Ningqing first. Everyone's wounds need to be treated quickly. Han Yunxi then remembered that Ningqing had been poisoned. She hurriedly asked Gu Beiyue to put Ningqing down and lay him flat. She didn't care about her own wounds. She squatted by the side and activated the detoxification system to conduct a closer inspection. At such a close distance, the detoxification system's efficiency greatly increased. After a while, Han Yunxi exclaimed, "Quick, search Jun Yixie's clothes and find the antidote. Hurry!" Everyone didn't know what was going on. Could it be that Han Yunxi couldn't make the antidote for Jun Yixie's poison? Didn't she usually make the antidote very quickly? Although everyone understood, they still hurriedly helped to search. Long Feiyi quickly found a small bottle of pills in Jun Yixie's torn clothes and handed it to Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi poured out all the pills and quickly chose one. Long Feiyi immediately came over to help. He pinched Ning Cheng's chin and forced Ning Cheng to open his mouth. Han Yunxi hurriedly stuffed the pill into his mouth. Ning Cheng was only unconscious, but he still had basic swallowing instincts. He swallowed the pill as soon as it reached his throat. At this moment, Han Yunxi heaved a sigh of relief. "What's going on?" Long Feiyi asked. Han Yunxi sighed softly and asked, "Mu Ling, how did Ningqing get poisoned? Why didn't you mention this in your letters?" Mu Ling, was very surprised. "Sister, didn't Ningqing tell you?" Ningqing had written a letter to Long Feiyi, explaining the situation between him and Jun Yixie very clearly. She, Ningjing, and Bai Yuqiao had always thought that Han Yunxi knew about Ning Cheng's poisoning. He didn't. Han Yunxi was very sure. This is a big misunderstanding," Mu Ling murmured. Han Yunxi's brows furrowed even tighter. This misunderstanding was indeed big. Fortunately, they had delayed the rescue and northern expedition. Fortunately, Bai Yuqiao had been exposed, and they had come to this point today. Otherwise, if they had followed the original plan, Ningqing would have died without a doubt. According to the original plan, Gu Beiyue would have gone to the army to rescue Ningqing. Gu Beiyue's medical skills were very high, but his poison skills were very weak. He wouldn't have been able to tell that Ningqing had been poisoned. Once he took Ningqing away, without the antidote within a day, Ningqing would be finished. Why didn't Ningqing mention anything about him being poisoned in his letter? Han Yunxi didn't have time to think too much about it. She carefully checked the pills in her hand again. If Han Yunxi wasn't sure before, then after seeing these pills, she was completely sure that Jun Yixie wanted to turn Ningqing into a poisonous person. "Sister, Ning Cheng's poison hasn't been cured yet. I heard from Bai Yuqiao that the antidote that Jun Yixie gives Ningqing every day can only prevent the poison from acting up for a day. It's not the real antidote," Mu Ling hurriedly reminded her. Han Yunxi already knew that Ningqing had to take the antidote every day. Coldly, she said, "This is an antidote, but it's also a poison. Half of the medicinal properties are used to detoxify the poison, and the other half is a new poison. The toxicity also has a suppressive effect on the original poison. Jun Yixie wants to turn Ningqing into a poisonous person, or even a poisonous corpse." Everyone was very surprised. Gu picked up the pills and smelled them, muttering, "I thought these pills were very familiar." Jun Yixie had changed the poison that Bai Yuqiao had poisoned Ningqing a long time ago. So, from the looks of it now, Jun Yixie didn't really want to work with Ningqing. On one hand, he was working with Ningqing, but on the other hand, he wanted to turn Ningqing into a poisonous person behind everyone's back. Once Ningqing became a poisonous person, then he would really be completely under Jun Yixie's control. Mu Ling said hatefully, "He deserves to die with grievances. How despicable. I only have a day to detoxify him immediately. After a day, he will have to take the medicine again. At that time, the toxicity will be completely different. Han Yunxi said seriously. Once Ning Qing took the antidote again, the toxicity in his body would change. She would have to redesign the detoxification plan and reformulate the antidote. This was the most complicated part of helping Ning Qing detoxify. Now, she could only be thankful that her detoxification system had enough medicinal herbs. If it wasn't for her diligent accumulation of various medicinal herbs over the years, the detoxification system wouldn't have been able to produce the antidote at all. In just a day's time, in this desolate wilderness, even if she had 2 medicinal geniuses by her side, they might not be able to find the medicine. Everyone didn't dare to disturb her. Han Yunxi had the detoxification system analyze all the poisons in Ning Cheng's body while also analyzing the medicinal properties of Jun Yixia's pills. She also collected some blood and conducted manual monitoring, coordinating with each other from different angles. Long Feiyi watched from the side, his gaze constantly falling on the wound on Han Yunxi's shoulder. He wanted to speak a few times, but he held himself back. "Your Highness, your injury is very important," Gu Beiyue reminded him in a low voice. Long Feiyi restrained his thoughts and turned around to let Gu Beiyue treat his wound. Tang Li had already pulled Mu Linger to the side for questioning. Mu Linger told Tang Li many things, especially how much pain Ning Jing had suffered when she gave birth to little Tang Tang. If it wasn't for the fact that he was holding little Tang Tang, who knew what Tang Li would have done after hearing so much? Gu silently sized up Deacon Jean. Deacon Jean knew that Gu was looking at him, but he let Gu look and was too lazy to pay attention to him. Among this group of people, he was the most hostile to Gu. Not long after, little Tang Tang began to cry again. Tang Li actually didn't know how to coax a child. He hugged little Tang Tang and shook her, talked to her and smiled at her. However, little Tang Tang continued to cry non-stop. Tang Li felt wronged and timid as he asked, "Ling, she can't be afraid of strangers, right?" Mu Linger didn't know what to say to him. She took little Tang Tang and said, "She's hungry." At this moment, Tang Li realized that there was no wet nurse. What did little Tang Tang eat for so many days? Mu Linger had no choice but to ask Deacon Jean for help. She said, "Jean Z is still hungry." She said it so naturally that people who didn't know would think that they were a young couple and that little Tang Tang was their child. Deacon Jean immediately summoned the tigress that was hiding nearby. At this moment, Tang Li found out that little Tang Tang had been eating tiger milk for several days. He looked at little Tang Tang in the arms of the tigress, not afraid of strangers at all. Instead, she looked very satisfied with eating, and his heart ached. If Ning Jing saw this scene, she would definitely cry. Of course, Tang Li was anxious to find Ning Jing. However, Han Yunxi and the rest were helping Ning Qing to detoxify the poison. He didn't dare to rush them and could only wait. Gu stopped staring at Deacon Jean and stared at little Tang Tang. He silently thought in his heart, this little guy grew up drinking tigress milk. In the future, she will definitely be a tigress like Ning Jing, right? 2 hours later, Han Yunxi finally decided on the detoxification plan and prepared all the required medicinal herbs. Fortunately, she had the detoxification system and used all the medicinal herbs to make pills. Some of the medicinal herbs that needed to be applied externally were also used directly. Otherwise, Han Yunxi would definitely encounter the problem of Mu Linger being Jean Z. Han Yunxi opened the needle bag and lined it up. She looked at Long Feiyi and realized that his wound had been treated. With Gu Beiyue around, she was relieved. She said, "Gu Beiyue, can you help me? Take off all of Ning Cheng's clothes. The antidote can't detoxify the poison." Before Gu Beiyue could agree, Long Feiyi said, "I'll do it." Actually, Long Feiyi especially didn't like Han Yunxi doing this kind of thing, especially in front of Ning Qing. Although he personally came to save him, although he acknowledged Ning Cheng's contribution to the cooperation between the East and Western Qin, this was all official business. From a personal point of view, he didn't want to have too much interaction with Ning Qing. But who asked Han Yunxi to be a poison doctor? Who asked her medical skills to be so good? Who asked Ning Qing to be poisoned? Gu Beiyue didn't say much. A helpless smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Long Fei Yi quickly took off all of Ning Cheng's clothes. At this moment, everyone saw the injuries on Ning Cheng's body. There were new and old injuries, knife wounds, gunshot wounds, sword wounds, and whip wounds. Some were from the past, and some were from Junie Xia. Han Yunxi didn't pay much attention to these injuries. She needed to hurry up and detoxify the poison. Not being affected by anything was her basic professionalism. However, she was soon distracted because she realized. Chapter 1089. What distracted Han Yunxi was none other than Ning Cheng's hand. If she hadn't held Ning Cheng's hand like this today, Han Yunxi wouldn't have thought that there would be something wrong with Ning Cheng's hand. She was very uneasy and didn't dare to make any wild guesses. She couldn't help but stop and say, Gu Beiyue, come over and take a look. What's wrong with Ning Cheng's hand? Hand? What's wrong? Gu Beiyue asked curiously. Most of Ning Cheng's injuries were on his body and not his limbs. There were more old injuries than new ones. Other than the wound on his shoulder caused by Junie Xia's dagger, most of them were whip wounds. In the explosion just now, Gu Beiyue was injured, but Ning Qing wasn't injured. It seems like. Han Yunxi didn't know how to explain it. It's just not right. Take a look. Palm. Gu Beiyue shifted his position and held Ning Cheng's hand. Just as he was about to examine it, Han Yunxi said, No, it's his arm and shoulder. It's his tendons and bones. Gu Beiyue immediately let go of Ning Cheng's hand and examined his arm and shoulder. After a thorough examination, Gu Beiyue was shocked. He was seriously injured, at least 5 years ago. It hasn't healed, and his tendons and bones are severely damaged. It must be a serious tear or even necrosis. Moreover, his upper arm is a prosthetic. Long Fei Yi looked over when he said this. Gu Beiyue was definitely the best doctor in the world. Although he was also shocked by Ning Cheng's condition, he didn't make a fuss. His voice was very soft, and only Long Fei Yi, who was beside him, heard it. Tang Li and the rest didn't know what was going on. After all, this was Ning Cheng's privacy. His hand is crippled? Long Fei Yi was indeed very surprised. Ning Cheng's tibia was severely damaged and had yet to recover. In addition, his upper arm was a prosthetic limb, so Ning Cheng's arm would not be able to exert much strength. This would not affect his daily life much, but if he were to practice martial arts or go to the battlefield, then this arm would be useless. Ning Cheng was not an ordinary person. He was the leader of a clan and a general of an army. He was someone who had to gallop on the battlefield and kill his enemies. If nothing else, he had to hold the sword in one hand and the reins in the other to kill the enemy. How could a crippled arm restrain a frightened warhorse? Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi had never heard of Great General Ning's arm being crippled, much less the Ning clan head himself. Just how had Ning Qing managed to hide this fact from the Tianing army and the Di clan all these years? If Ning Qing hadn't fainted today and they hadn't been able to grab his left arm, who would have thought it would be like this? Han Yunxi couldn't help but think back to her past interactions with Ning Qing. She really couldn't remember anything. She had never paid attention to Ning Cheng's hand. She only remembered seeing Ning Qing holding a sword with both hands, but who would have thought that Ning Qing only had the strength of one arm? Can it be cured? Han Yunxi asked quickly. Gu Beiyue carefully examined the arm again before he said helplessly, "Princess, it's too late. Even if there's a miracle medicine, the effects will be average. Moreover, even if it cures his tibia, it won't have much meaning." As Gu Beiyue spoke, he gestured at Ning Chang's upper arm. This entire section is a prosthetic limb. If this subordinate's guesses are correct, Ning Chang must have been seriously injured that year. All the bones in his upper arm must have been shattered. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed a prosthetic limb. Han Yunxi understood. They couldn't give him a real upper arm. Even with modern medicine's bone grafting, it was impossible to transplant an entire upper arm. Therefore, no matter how they treated it, Ning Chang's arm was destined to be unable to exert any strength. Faced with this situation, Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue had a tacit understanding. Since Ning Chang had concealed this matter so well, rather than exposing him, they might as well pretend that they didn't know anything. This was privacy and dignity. "I don't know anything," Han Yunxi said softly. She took out her gold needles and began to search for acupoints to apply them. When Han Yunxi said this, Long Fei Yi naturally understood. Gu Beiyue put down Ning Chang's hand and checked his other hand without any extra curiosity. Gu Beiyue didn't hold Ning Chang's left palm. Otherwise, he would have discovered that Ning Chang's left palm was also crippled. Hidden in this palm was a small gold needle, hiding Ning Chang's softest and most unbridled heart. Han Yunxi restrained her thoughts and focused on searching for acupoints. She carefully applied the needles. Long Fei Yi was at the side as an assistant, waiting for orders at any time. Thinking back, it had always been Gu Beiyue's job to be Han Yunxi's assistant. Who would have thought that one day, it would be taken away by Long Fei Yi? Seeing that Han Yunxi's movements weren't big, Gu Beiyue silently squatted down beside her and carefully began to treat her wound. As soon as he touched Han Yunxi's shoulder, Han Yunxi looked over. "Princess, don't worry. This subordinate won't affect you." He smiled slightly. This scene was so familiar. That year, Han Yunxi was whipped by General Mu at General Mu's residence. Later, when she was injured and treated Mu Qingwu's poison with acupuncture, Gu Beiyue was also at her side. He also helped her treat her wound while she was applying acupuncture. At that time, Han Yunxi was amazed at Gu Beiyue's treatment of the wound. It really didn't affect her acupuncture at all, and it didn't hurt at all. Although it wasn't as if the sea had turned into mulberry fields in a few years, many things had changed. Gu Beiyue was no longer the Dr. Gu of that year. However, Han Yunxi found that his smile at this moment was so similar to that year. It hadn't changed at all. Han Yunxi smiled as well, before returning her attention to her needles. Gu Beiyue's lips curled into a faint smile. His movements were practiced and careful. It really didn't affect Han Yunxi at all. It had been a long, long time since he saw Han Yunxi's serious and focused appearance at such a close distance. Even if he was no longer the Dr. Gu of that year, and she was no longer the Qin Wangfei of that year, in his eyes, she was still the same person who stunned him, moved him, and made him lose himself in her. Her serious frown didn't change at all. Gu Beiyue quickly collected his thoughts and memories. He looked at Long Fei Yi and found that Long Fei Yi was looking at him. "Is the injury deep?" Long Fei Yi asked in a low voice. "It's not a big injury. Your Highness can rest assured," Gu Beiyue lightly replied. "Will it leave a scar?" Long Fei Yi asked again. "It depends on the medication. I can't guarantee that the few prescriptions I have will be effective. When I leave the mountain tomorrow, I have to find the medicine immediately," Gu Beiyue said honestly. Write a prescription later and have the shadow guard look for it immediately. Long Fei Yi said again. Finally, Han Yunqi raised her head and frowned at Long Fei Yi. Don't talk. You're disturbing me. Long Fei Yi was resentful and obediently shut his mouth. A helpless smile flashed across Gu Beiyue's eyes. It turned out that her seriousness and focus were so easily broken. Unfortunately, he couldn't do it. Han Yunqi inserted many needles into Ning Cheng's arms and even made a few cuts to draw out the poison. After that, she made Ning Cheng take a pill. This was probably the longest detoxification Han Yunqi had ever taken. It wasn't until the next afternoon that she finally got Ning Cheng out of danger and didn't have to take Jun Yixie's medicine every day. However, in the following month, Ning Cheng still had to take the antidote she concocted every day to completely remove the poison in his body. After detoxifying the poison, Han Yunqi was exhausted. She collapsed in Long Fei Ye's arms and didn't want to move. She wanted nothing more than to sleep until the sky turned dark. However, she couldn't. There was still no news from Ning Jing, Su Xiaoyu, and Bai Yuqiao. Tang Li and Mu Ling saw that Han Yunqi was so tired and didn't dare to rush her or ask Long Fei Yi. Unexpectedly, Deacon Jean spoke again. Han Yunqi, where's my indenture contract? Han Yunqi glanced at him. I'm not free. Wait. Han Yunqi really didn't understand where Deacon Jean got his confidence from to ask for his indenture contract from her. Didn't he know that all of this was caused by his kidnapping? It was fine that she wasn't in a hurry to settle the score with him, but he was in a hurry to collect the debt from her. Deacon Jean still wanted to speak, but Han Yunqi beat him to it. She said, Ling, after you escaped from Tiger's prison, where did you meet with the kidnapping? Who had the ability to kidnap you? Yesterday, Mu Ling didn't explain it clearly. They were busy dealing with Jun Yixie, so they didn't ask much. Now that they wanted to find Ning Jing and the others' whereabouts, they naturally had to ask properly. Ning Jing hadn't even had a proper rest after giving birth before tossing about like this. Han Yunqi was worried for her. With such torment, no matter how much she nourished her body, she would still need to make up for it. Han Yunqi wasn't just worried about this. She had another layer of worry. Someone who could kidnap people from the tiger's claws couldn't be simple. She thought of someone, but she wasn't sure and hoped that it wasn't him. Speaking of the kidnapping, Mu Ling, was still afraid. She said, Sis, the person who kidnapped us was a mysterious person. He was masked, so we couldn't tell who he was. He was very powerful. We didn't even see what he did, but the two big white tigers melted into a pool of blood. Not even their bones were left. If Bai Yuqiao hadn't stopped him, Jin Zi, the children, and I wouldn't have been able to escape. That person wanted to kill us. I don't know either. It's poison. Han Yunqi hurriedly interrupted, as if she didn't want Mu Ling, to continue speaking. By Yanqing. Long Fei Yi was very sure. He finally understood why Jun Yixie didn't search for the hostages after losing them. Instead, he wanted to die together with them. From the looks of it, Jun Yixie already knew that the person who kidnapped them was Bai Yanqing. He couldn't beat Bai Yanqing, and he didn't know what Bai Yanqing wanted to do. That was why he gave up so thoroughly. Mu Ling, what don't you know? Where's Ning Jing? Where is she? Tang Li couldn't stay calm. Mu Ling had said so much to him just now. Didn't she say very clearly that Ning Jing and the others were kidnapped? Now what was she trying to say? Mu Ling, was easily frightened. After being yelled at by Tang Li, she blurted out, Actually, I don't know if Ning Jing and the others were kidnapped, or, Han Yunqi interrupted again, all right. Where did you get robbed? Take me there. It's in the mountains behind Tiger's prison, Mu Ling said anxiously. Gu and Mu Ling walked in front. Deacon Jean followed behind with a gloomy face. Gu Beiyue supported Ning Qing, and the group went to the back of Tiger's prison. The fire in Tiger's prison was still burning, and it lit up the surroundings. Before Mu Ling could say the exact location, Han Yunxi detected that there was poison nearby. She ran over first, and Tang Li followed closely behind. He was even faster than his brother. They didn't run far before they saw bloodstains on the ground. Chapter 1090. There were patches of blood stains on the ground, intermittent. Han Yunxi could tell at a glance that this was the color of the blood stains that had melted into the soil. Some time had passed, and some of the blood stains had already faded, but some had already blended into the soil. That was why the blood stains were intermittent. Mu Ling and Deacon Jean only saw 2 tigers that had melted, but based on the analysis of the blood stains on the ground, the amount of blood was not just 2 tigers. Tang Li stood at the side, hugging little Tang Tang tightly, not moving at all. Long Fei Yi and the rest came over and were about to touch the soil when Han Yunxi stopped them. Don't touch it. This soil is all poisonous. This kind of poison is specially used to corrode the flesh. Sister Jing and the rest, were they kidnapped? Mu Ling asked timidly. She no longer hoped that Sister Jing and the rest could escape. She only hoped that Sister Jing and the rest wouldn't be among the blood stains on the ground. Tang Li immediately looked at her. Mu Ling clearly didn't do anything bad, but she was still frightened. She avoided Tang Li's gaze. Han Yunxi ignored Mu Ling. She squatted on the ground and carefully examined the poisoned blood. How could she not have the same extravagant hope as Mu Ling? Unfortunately, the detoxification system quickly gave her a piece of bad news. She stood up and said calmly, "There's animal blood in these bloodstains." Although it was cruel, she still looked at Tang Li and said seriously, "There's also human blood." Before Han Yunxi could finish, Mu Ling hurriedly interrupted her. Did they bleed when they were injured? Even if there was human blood, it didn't prove that they were dead. Unfortunately, Han Yunxi denied this theory. All of this human blood belongs to one person. Based on the amount of blood lost, it's enough to cause death. The DNA could be found even if the blood stains had been left for several years. What more in a month or 2? The detoxification system would never make a mistake, although Han Yunxi did not want to believe it. So, one of Ning Jing, Su Xiaoyu, or Bai Yuqiao was killed. Gu interrupted. It seems that their bodies were also destroyed. TSK, what kind of poison is this? Why is it so similar to perplexing butterfly illusion? It must be Bai Yanqing. He wouldn't kill Su Xiaoyu. Long Fei Yi calmly analyzed. Suddenly, Tang Li shouted, "It's definitely not Ning Jing." Little Tang Tang was frightened by his roar and began to cry loudly. The more she cried, the fiercer she became. Mu Linger's heart ached. She rushed over and said, "Tang Li, you scared her. Let me hug you. Sister Jing will be fine. She will be fine." Tang Li ignored her and hugged little Tang Tang even tighter. He looked at Han Yunxi, annoyed and helpless. He did not say anything, but he hoped that his sister-in-law could give him a clear answer. Han Yunxi's eyes flashed with a complicated look. She did not know how to comfort him. Long Fei Yi analyzed seriously, Ning Jing has value as a hostage. Bai Yuqiao, on the other hand, has no value at all to Bai Yanqing. After he said that, Tang Li shouted again, "Brother, I believe you. I believe you." His loud voice made little Tang Tang cry even louder. No matter who died, Mu Ling'er was especially upset. Her eyes were full of tears. She said to Tang Li in a choked voice, "Tang Li, can you give me the child? Can't you? Don't scare her anymore. If Sister Jing finds out, she won't let you off." Tang Li immediately fell silent. He did not know what to do. Mu Ling'er snatched little Tang Tang back, hugged her tightly, and kissed her little face. Little Tang Tang was saved by the few of them. Looking at the bloodstains on the ground, she could only feel some comfort by hugging little Tang Tang. Strangely enough, little Tang Tang stopped crying once she was in Mu Ling'er's arms. Tang Li looked on helplessly. He wanted to take his daughter back, but he could not open his mouth. Bai Yanqing took the hostages a long time ago, but he hasn't done anything yet. What is he trying to do? Han Yunxi really did not understand. With the addition of Tianshan Kenzo's third venerable lord, Bai Yanqing had 3 hostages in his hands. Tang Li punched a tree nearby and shouted at the mountain, "Bai Yanqing, come out. Give Ning Jing back to me. Bai Yanqing, come out if you have the guts." The echoes reverberated in the mountain forest. Other than that, there was no other response. They were in the open, while Bai Yanqing was in the dark. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi were not familiar with this feeling. They felt like they were prey, being watched. However, they could not think of any way to force Bai Yanqing out. This old thing did not even care about his 2 closest disciples. What else in this world, and who else, did he care about? Long Fei Yi, we only have the perplexing butterfly illusion left, Han Yunxi said softly. Long Fei Yi did not say anything, but nodded. Right now, they only had this method. They could use the perplexing butterfly illusion to lure Bai Yanqing out. "Your Highness, Princess, we shouldn't stay here for long. Let's go back to the army first and discuss this further," Gu Beiyue said seriously. Although things did not go as planned, at least they managed to rescue Ning Qing. Just as everyone was about to leave, Deacon Jean blocked Han Yunxi's path. He said word by word, "Han Yunxi, where's my indenture contract? Come back with us." "We'll talk about it later," Han Yunxi said cold. "Impossible." Deacon Jean refused. Han Yunxi had been tolerating it, but when she heard this, she immediately flared up. She said rudely, "Then don't take it." Unexpectedly, Mu Ling said, "Sister, give him the indenture contract." "I promised him." "Why should I give him the indenture contract?" Han Yunxi asked cold. Mu Ling was shocked. "Sister, he saved us." Indeed, if Deacon Jean had not rescued Ning Jing and the others, they might not have been able to rescue Ning Qing from Jun Yixia so quickly, much less kill Jun Yixia so quickly. However, wasn't all of this caused by Deacon Jean? It's only right that he saved you. If he hadn't colluded with that Qing guy, Eastern and Western Qin's army would have already flattened northernly. At most, he saved you and the children. Ning Jing's whereabouts are still unknown. What right does he have to ask me for the indenture contract? Han Yunxi glared at Deacon Jean angrily and warned him cold, "Jean Z, let me tell you, if anything happens to Ning Jing, don't even mention the indenture contract, you'll have to leave your life behind." Tang Li watched from the side. Although he didn't say anything, his eyes were full of hostility. Deacon Jean didn't care about them. He only cared about Mu Ling. His long, narrow, and cold eyes slowly narrowed, emitting a dangerous aura. He stared at Mu Ling. Mu Ling bit her lip, not knowing what to do. She promised Deacon Jean that she would persuade her sister to return the indenture contract to him, but now, she couldn't refute her sister's words. At this moment, Goose suddenly pulled Mu Ling behind him. He sneered and looked at Deacon Jean from head to toe. What, are you bullying our Ling because she's young and easy to trick? Deacon Jean still didn't say anything and just looked at Mu Ling Mu Ling didn't know what to do. She would rather hate Deacon Jean, but she didn't know when she started to hate him. Goo, take him away. Han Yunxi said cold. Finally, Mu Ling couldn't take it anymore. She shook off Gu's hand and ran to Han Yunxi's side to pull her arm. Sis, if it wasn't for Jean Z, I wouldn't have lived until now. And little Tang Tang would have starved to death long ago. Sis, just let him make up for his mistakes with good deeds. Forget it. Han Yunxi was suspicious. Mu Ling, this little girl, had always been a vengeful person. Why was she so tolerant of Deacon Jean? A complicated look flashed across her eyes, and she said, Mu Ling, you can forget about it, but what about Ning Jing? Even if Ning Jing comes back, it won't be so easy to forget it. Tang Li finally spoke up. Mu Ling became even more anxious. She realized that Jean Z was right. As long as he brought her back, only death would await him. However, he still brought her over because of her promise. Mu Ling didn't want to haggle over who was right and who was wrong, and who owed who more. She didn't want to go back on her promise, and she didn't want to owe anyone anything. She steeled her heart and grabbed Deacon Jin's hand tightly. She said, Sis, Ling has already pledged to marry Jean Z. Ling was born Jean Z's woman, and will die as Jean Z's ghost. If you don't let him off, then you won't let Ling off. Han Yunxi was dumbfounded. Chapter 1091. Although it was already nighttime, Han Yunxi's group did not stay for long and immediately left Tiger's prison. The trip to Tiger's prison saved them more time than they expected. At this time, the Ning army was still attacking the three-way pass. As soon as they left the mountain, Long Fei Yi received news that the breakthrough was going smoothly. Deputy General Shui estimated that they could take the three-way pass within 5 days. 30,000 steel cavalry were already waiting at the three-way battlefield. As long as the news of Jun Yixie's death spread, the three-way pass would collapse on its own and the southern part of Northern Li would be thrown into chaos. Long Fei Yi had already taken Jun Yixie's token and ordered the Shadow Guard to deliver it to Deputy General Shui. This was undoubtedly great news for the North Expedition Army. Han Yunxi's group was heading south and could meet up with Deputy General Shui's group. After saving Ningqing, Han Yunxi would not have to worry about the cooperation between Eastern and Western Qin. Even if there were any conflicts, they would be left to Long Fei Yi and Ningqing to discuss. Han Yunxi was happy and relaxed. After leaving the mountain, the group headed south. They did not know that the person they were looking for, Bai Yanqing, was actually in the mountain. After they left Tiger's prison, Bai Yanqing arrived. Beside him was a black-clothed servant, Hao San. Hao San knew that Jun Yixie had buried gunpowder in Tiger's prison. He also knew that Jun Yixie was determined to perish together with Han Yunxi's group. Therefore, he had already escaped from Tiger's prison. Jun Yixie's subordinates either died or fled. All that was left of Tiger's prison was a sea of fire. Jun Yixie's corpse was in front of this sea of fire. Bai Yanqing walked over and looked down at Jun Yixie. He said indifferently, after all, he is old man's disciple. Master, what is the background of that Deacon Jean? Hao San asked. He's definitely not a direct descendant of the Black Clan. Bai Yanqing was very certain. The Black Clan had the beast-taming technique, which didn't exclude the possibility that other clans on this continent also had this kind of talent and skill. Bai Yanqing did not know where Deacon Jean came from, but he was very sure that Junie Xia was a direct descendant of the Black Clan. Ever since the war in the Great Qin Empire, the Feng clan and the Black Clan had been on good terms. Junie Xia's father was his best friend, so there was no mistake about it. Hao Xin frowned as he looked at Junie Xia, who had died with his eyes wide open. He sneered, "This Jin Zi is really vicious." Bai Yanqing didn't say much. He took out a bottle of poison and slowly poured it on Junie Xia's body. Soon, Junie Xia melted into a pool of blood. Not even his bones were left, as if he had never existed in this world. Hao San looked at his master's expressionless face and couldn't help but feel fear. Junie Xia could be considered his master's half-son, but his master really didn't have any feelings for him. "Master, from the looks of it, they shouldn't have gotten the Ganjiang sword yet," Hao San said again. Before he escaped from Tiger's prison, he paid special attention and didn't see any treasured swords in Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi's hands. Bai Yanqing looked at the raging fire. His pale face was especially clear under the light of the fire. He smiled kindly and said, "Whether or not they have it, the old man won't give them any more time. Hao San, go and tell that great general that the Three Roads Pass is about to be broken. It's time to move." "Yes." Hao San was overjoyed and immediately left. What Bai Yanqing wanted to do and who the great general was, this secret would be revealed soon. Danger was approaching Han Yunxi and the others, but it was a pity that they couldn't guard against it. When they reached the county town, Han Yunxi and the others changed into the carriage. Tang Li brought little Tang Tang back to the Tang sect first. He naturally had to come back, but he had to settle little Tang Tang down first. How could such a young child run around with everyone like this? Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi naturally rode in the same carriage. Other than Gu, no one present dared to disturb them. Gu dared, but he didn't have the ability to do so. He, Gu Beiyue, and Ning Qing were in the same carriage. Gu Beiyue was responsible for looking after Ning Qing. Deacon Jin and Mu Linger were in the same carriage. The group disguised themselves as a caravan and set off from Tianhe City towards the southeast. That night, everyone was exhausted and nestled in their carriages to rest. Han Yunxi was in a daze when she suddenly woke up. She once again sensed that Lil Thing was cultivating. In the past, the feeling was always very vague, but recently, the feeling was becoming more and more obvious. She knew that she was very, very close to the third level of the poison storage space. She just needed an opportunity to break through. After being separated for so long, Lil Thing must be very lonely. Han Yunxi thought of Lil Thing's big innocent eyes and felt sad. She didn't know when she would see Lil Thing again. This time, when they went to the army and handed over the military affairs, sent Ningqing back to the D clan, they had to lure Bai Yanqing out no matter what. Even if they couldn't kill Bai Yanqing, with their current strength, it was still possible to trap Bai Yanqing. If Immerse's sword could be cultivated earlier, they would be more confident. When she thought of these things, Han Yunxi could no longer sleep. She nestled in Long Fei Ye's arms and didn't dare to move for fear of waking him up. Sometimes, she even suspected that he wasn't sleeping soundly. Otherwise, how could he know every time she moved? When she couldn't sleep, Han Yunxi began to let her imagination run wild. Suddenly, she remembered something. This month's good friend seemed to be late again. Why did she take her pulse? Unfortunately, she was still very disappointed. In the early stages of pregnancy, the pulse wasn't very obvious. Unless it was an expert, it couldn't be felt. Although Han Yunxi knew this, she was still very disappointed. She guessed that her good friend was probably just late. When she was free, she still had to ask Gu Beiyue. It couldn't go on like this. At this time, Mu Ling also couldn't sleep. She leaned against the window and stared blankly at the dark night. She also didn't know how she got to this point. When the poisonous mosquitoes flew out of the mountain and the poisonous snakes swarmed out, she and Jean Zi both knew that the reinforcements had arrived. Jean Zi said that when Han Yunxi and the others fought with Jun Yixia, he would take her out of the mountain and go to Winter Crow country, hide their identities, and never come back. She had a big fight with him and even tried to snatch little Tang Tang back and escape. Unfortunately, she couldn't do it. She called him a thief who stole the child. Unexpectedly, he told her very seriously that if he didn't leave, Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi wouldn't let him go. If he left, he would treat her and the child well. Helpless, she could only beg him and exchange conditions with him. As long as he returned the child to Tangli, as long as he took her to see Han Yunxi and the others and told them the truth about the hostages in Tiger's prison, she would definitely persuade Han Yunxi to let him go. She would definitely marry him and go back to Winter Crow country with him. Until now, Jean Zi's answer still lingered in her ears. He answered her like this. He said, Mu Ling, I can give you a year. If Gu marries you within a year, I'll pretend that you didn't promise me anything today. Jean Zi definitely didn't know that she had never asked Chi brother to marry her. She had only asked for Chi brother to have her in his heart, and that was enough. However, today, she said that she was going to get married. Chi brother didn't say a word. She had been kidnapped as a hostage and had experienced many dangers. Today, she was finally rescued. She should have been relieved. However, Mu Ling couldn't relax at all. Sandwiched between Jean Zi and Han Yunxi, she felt very tired, but she couldn't tell the truth. She suddenly missed the days in Tiger's prison. Although she was trapped, she could talk to Sister Jing at night and wait for help with Sister Jing. Jean Zi sat at the side with his arms crossed. He looked like he was asleep, but he was actually very awake. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at Mu Ling. He looked at her for a long time without batting an eyelid, but Mu Ling didn't realize it. When they were in three-way black market, many women took the initiative to send themselves to him, and some of them were smart and quick-witted. He didn't know how he fell into this girl's trap. He had always hated silly women. Deacon Jean seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he sighed softly and closed his eyes again. At this moment, Gu suddenly came over. He said loudly through the curtain, "Girl, come over here for a moment." Mu Ling immediately came back to her senses and turned around without thinking. Okay. Deacon Jean didn't open his eyes until she got off the carriage. However, he quickly closed them again and sat motionless. After Mu Ling got off the carriage, she followed Gu into their carriage. Ning Cheng was still unconscious, but Gu Beiyue wasn't really asleep. He was taking a nap at the side, afraid that Ning Cheng would suddenly wake up in the middle of the night. When he saw Mu Ling coming over, he glanced at her, nodded, and closed his eyes again. Mu Ling sat opposite Gu. Looking at her favorite face, which had haunted her the most, her heart, which had been aching for the whole night, finally stopped hurting. Tell me, how did this Jean guy trick you? Gu spoke in the tone of a parent. Mu Ling thought for a long time and decided to go all out and test him. She said, "He didn't trick me. I did it willingly. I like him. I like him a lot." Gu raised his eyebrows and looked at her, not saying anything for a long time. Mu Ling waited. Although she looked calm, her heart was in a mess and her heartbeat was racing. After a while, Gu asked again, "When did you like him? What do you like about him?" "When we were kidnapped, it was all Uncle Chang's mischief. Jean Zi took good care of me and Ning Jing along the way. He gave us whatever we wanted. He even kept in touch to find hot food for me to eat every day. When we were at Tiger's Den, he found out about my fake pregnancy, but he didn't expose me. At this point, Goose stopped her. He rubbed his chin, looking puzzled. Girl, what does Gene Z like about you? I don't know. Anyway, he likes me too. He likes me a lot. Mu Ling said again. Gu Qishao snorted disdainfully. Little ass, do you really believe that just because someone treats you a little better? If he doesn't hook up with you, how can he fight with your sister? How can he get the indenture agreement? Gu leaned over and pinched Mu Ling's nose. He smiled dotingly. Silly girl, why didn't Chi brother realize that you were so stupid in the past? Mu Ling wanted to smile at Chi brother like before, but she didn't this time. She said seriously, Chi brother, Ling is serious. Ling really wants to marry him. If Gene Z didn't use me, he could have run away. Is the indenture agreement more important than his life? He knew that he might lose his life if he came to find you, but he still brought me here. Mu Ling steeled her heart and said, Chi brother, help me persuade my sister. Goose stepped back and asked with interest, little girl, so, you don't want Chi brother anymore? At this moment, Mu Ling's heart almost stopped. Unfortunately. Chapter 1092. Gu's words brightened Mu Ling's gloomy world. However, Gu's words made her feel hopeless. Gu chuckled and said, TSK, my silly girl has finally grown up. She's not clingy to Chi brother anymore. He was smiling so happily. Humans would have a lot of helplessness, but their hearts were absolutely free. It was because of this that there was so much pain. Even if she left with Gene Z, even if she no longer chased after Chi Gij, her heart would always only have Chi Gij in it. But she didn't even have the chance to answer him. Mu Ling wanted to laugh and laugh at herself. Even if he didn't give her a chance, she had to fight for it. After all, this was going to be her strongest night. Mu Ling looked into Chi brother's eyes and answered him seriously, Chi brother, you don't want Ling anymore? Gu was stunned when he heard this. However, he soon laughed out loud. Silly girl, Chi brother, Ling is serious. Ling isn't joking with you. Mu Ling interrupted him. She knew that he was going to laugh it off and treat it as a joke. Gu suddenly became gentle. He leaned over and patted Mu Ling's head. He said seriously, silly girl, how could Chi brother not want you? No matter who you marry, you'll always be Chi brother's silly girl. His gentle gaze and gentle words were the antidote she had longed for many years. It was the only antidote that could cure her unrequited love. However, at this moment, she felt like she had been poisoned and was beyond redemption. The gentle Chi brother was right in front of her, but her heart was in indescribable pain. She knew it. She knew it. She knew it. She knew that Chi brother had always treated her like a sister. It had always been like this. She couldn't help but cry. Chi brother, can you help me and Gold Z escape? Gu wiped her tears and said seriously, listen to me. Your sister and brother-in-law haven't figured out Deacon Jin's background yet. What if he's really a direct descendant of the Black Clan? Will you still marry him? What if he's not a direct descendant of the Black Clan? What if he doesn't become my sister's enemy? Can I marry him? Mu Ling asked again. Gu smiled. Silly girl, even if he's a direct descendant of the Black Clan, as long as he treats you sincerely and you really like him, you can marry him. Chi, aren't you afraid that you'll be cheated? We're not in a hurry. Let's wait until we find out more about him. When you get married, Chi brother will prepare a huge dowry for you. Mu Ling sniffled and kept nodding. Okay. I'll listen to you. I'll remember that I don't want anyone's dowry except for Qi brothers. Gu Qishao rubbed her head again with a grin. Go on, rest early. There was nothing more to say, but Mu Ling couldn't bear to leave. But Qi brother had already asked the coachman to stop, so she could only get off. Once Mu Ling left, Gu heaved a sigh of relief. He turned to look at Gu Beiyue, thinking that Gu Beiyue would say something. Who knew that Gu Beiyue's eyes were still closed, as if he was really asleep. Gu sat for a while and couldn't help but lean over to Gu Beiyue. He whispered, that girl has been pestering me for many years. Gu Beiyue didn't say anything. Gu stretched lazily and said, I'm finally free. Gu Beiyue still didn't say anything. Gu raised his arm and hooked it around Gu Beiyue's shoulder. He chuckled. Seventh Master is in a good mood today. I'll keep watch for you. Go to sleep. Gu Beiyue opened his eyes and said indifferently, Seventh Young Master, I think Miss Ling, was testing you on purpose. What are you so happy about? Gu knew Mu Ling, too well. Of course, he knew that Mu Ling, was deliberately provoking him. He replied, if she didn't test me on purpose, how would I have the chance to make things clear to her? Now that I've paid her back, I'm free of debt. Gu Beiyue wasn't in the mood to meddle, but since Gu had spoken, he spoke out of turn. Miss Ling, was probably threatened by Jin Zi, right? Although Mu Ling, was simple, she wasn't stupid. She wouldn't be deceived. It was very likely that she was threatened, so even though everyone was present, she didn't tell the truth. However, Gu Beiyue couldn't figure out why Mu Ling would be threatened by Jin Zi. She has her sister. Gu chuckled and said, she also has a brother-in-law. We don't have to worry about her. Gu Beiyue raised his eyebrows and glanced at Gu. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he just smiled and didn't say anything. Gu was heartless. Although he was cruel, he was straightforward and wouldn't harm someone for a lifetime. In terms of being carefree and straightforward, Gu might not be as good as Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue didn't discuss this issue anymore. He removed the hand on his shoulder and said indifferently, if you can't sleep, go keep watch. After all, we're in northerly territory. As soon as Gu Qishao set out, he looked back and forth. He was about to head for the front of the carriage when he saw Mu Linger sobbing outside. He immediately retreated and pretended that he didn't see anything. He ran to the back of the convoy and mingled with the shadow guard. Deep in the night, the carriage sped along. Deacon Jean waited and waited. He couldn't bear it anymore, but he still sat in the carriage and didn't move. He promised to give her a year's time. How could he not even wait for one night? He closed his eyes and continued to sit quietly. However, he didn't know that Mu Ling was sitting outside and crying silently. How many tears did she have to cry to complete a farewell ceremony? How could she convince herself to continue to be strong? Finally, the coachman couldn't bear it anymore and advised, Miss Ling, don't be like this. Who bullied you? Tell the princess and let the princess help you. Don't be afraid. When Jin Zi heard this, he suddenly raised the curtain. Mu Ling subconsciously turned around and met with Deacon Jin's cold and terrifying eyes. Seeing Mu Ling's eyes swollen and red like blood and her little face streaked with tears, Deacon Jin clenched his fists tightly. He glared at her and fiercely slammed down the curtain, ignoring her. However, not long after, he opened his mouth and said, "Why aren't you coming in?" Mu Ling didn't know how to answer and simply threw him a sentence, "None of your business." After saying that, Deacon Jean lifted the curtain and unceremoniously pulled Mu Ling into the carriage and pressed her down on the seat. Mu Ling struggled. "What are you doing? Don't forget that you're now in my sister's hands." Deacon Jean didn't care and asked coldly, "Did Gu bully you again?" "No." Mu Ling denied. "Then why are you crying?" Deacon Jean questioned. "Why do you care what I'm crying about? Let go of me, otherwise I'm going to call for help." Mu Ling was very unyielding. Deacon Jean stared at her for a moment and released her. But just as Mu Ling was about to get up, he suddenly pressed her down on the seat and kissed her lips. This kiss was filled with his anger and domineering. After barging in so rudely, he didn't give her any room to resist and entangled her little tongue. Mu Ling wanted to bite him but couldn't. She shook her head vigorously, but Deacon Jean held her head with both hands and restrained her. Mu Ling could only hit him viciously and even scratch him. Finally, Deacon Jean released her and leaned his forehead against hers, panting heavily. She pushed him away and slapped him viciously, leaving a red palm print on his face. "Miss Ling, are you all right? What happened to you?" The coachman's voice was heard. Mu Ling sat dejectedly at the side and said indifferently, "I'm fine. I was just playing around." When she said this, Deacon Jean laughed and shook his head helplessly. He said in a low voice, "Mu Ling, you can tell the truth. You don't have to be controlled by me." Mu Ling didn't answer him. After a while, Deacon Jean asked again, "Mu Ling, can I interpret it as, you can't bear to part with me?" "No." Mu Ling immediately retorted. "Then why is that?" Deacon Jean asked. "We only had a verbal agreement. You can go back on your word." Mu Ling looked at him and retorted, "You knew that I had the chance to go back on my word. Why did you agree to it in the first place?" Deacon Jean smoothed his fine bangs with both hands, revealing his handsome face. He chuckled self-deprecatingly and said indifferently, "Because my fucking brain is damaged." Mu Ling obviously knew what he meant. Looking at him, her heart felt unbearable and she didn't know what to say. Deacon Jean asked coldly, "What about you? Is your brain damaged too?" "Jean Z, you're a good person. I can't harm you," Mu Ling said seriously. Her sister was already very wary of Jean Z. If she told the truth, would her sister let Jean Z go? She didn't know him at all, but she could see and feel that he longed for freedom and his home. When he talked about the scenery of the Winter Crow Prairie, the yearning expression on his face couldn't lie. "Jean Z, I promised you that I would get the indenture agreement, so I will definitely get it for you. I don't like you. Don't make things difficult for me, okay?" Mu Ling asked. Deacon Jean sneered. "Mu Ling, you want me to believe you when you go back on your word? Do you really think that I, Jean Z, am a fool?" Mu Ling looked at him, speechless. Deacon Jean avoided her tearful little face and said coldly, "Mu Ling, unless you go back on all your promises, I won't give up." He gave her two choices. She could either do as she said and go with him, or expose him so that he would never be free. He used his most desired freedom as a wager and bet on her heart. The next day, Han Yunxi had enough rest and called Mu Ling over. She used both the carrot and the stick, but Mu Ling insisted that she and Deacon Jean were truly in love. Han Yunxi didn't force her. She sent people to the Winter Crow tribe while waiting for Ning Cheng to wake up. Deacon Jean was bought by the D clan. If there were any clues to his past, it should be in Ning Cheng's hands. The news of Jun Yixie's death quickly spread throughout Northernly, causing panic in the southern part of Northernly. A few days later, good news came from the Three Roads Pass. The Ning army had broken through the Three Roads Pass and entered northernly with 30,000 cavalry. When the news reached Long Fei Yi asked the Shadow Guard to arrange for everyone to stay in a nearby manor and wait for the Ning army to arrive. Everyone had just settled down when Ning Qing woke up. At this time, only Gu Beiyue was by his side. Gu Beiyue was overjoyed and was about to call someone over when Ning Qing pulled his hand. Chapter 1093. Ning Qing grabbed Gu Beiyue's hand. Ning Qing didn't say anything. Gu Beiyue seemed to know what he meant and didn't say anything. He just looked at him quietly with a slight smile. Seeing him smile, Ning Qing also smiled. Gu Beiyue. He had known about the Shadow Clan since he could remember. He had seen this guy a few years ago when the D clan and the Nether clan had cooperated. How could he have known that the hostage the Nether clan had given him was the descendant of the Shadow clan that he had been searching for so many years? Now, he knew that it was Gu Beiyue who had saved him from the explosion. If it wasn't for Gu Beiyue's shadow technique, no one in this world would have been able to save him. Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue. So it was you. Ha! Even though his laughter affected his wounds, Ning Qing still laughed loudly. Gu Beiyue smiled bitterly. If he had known that the D clan was so loyal, how could there have been so many misunderstandings? Ning Qing smiled and was about to get off the bed when Gu Beiyue hurriedly stopped him. Patriarch Ning, you're injured. You shouldn't get off the bed for the next few days. Ning Qing became serious and insisted on getting off the bed. Gu Beiyue thought that Ning Qing wanted to see the princess, so he couldn't stop him. He could only help him. No. Ning Qing didn't let him help him. He stubbornly sat up on his own. He didn't help him, but stood up straight as soon as his legs touched the ground. He was clearly a merchant, but he looked like a soldier. He cupped his fists and bowed to Gu Beiyue. Gu Beiyue was very surprised and hurriedly came over to help him. Patriarch Ning, what are you doing? Back then on the West Chu battlefield, I had eyes but failed to recognize you. Ning Qing represents the entire D clan to apologize to Patriarch Gu. Ning Qing was serious and magnanimous. Gu Beiyue smiled helplessly. Since we don't know each other, why are you being so courteous? It's all a misunderstanding. I've also misunderstood Patriarch Ning. Gu Beiyue released him and took a step back. He also clasped his hands and bowed seriously. The two of them looked at each other and smiled faintly. A gentleman's smile can erase all enmity. They were all upright gentlemen, and they never had any enmity to speak of. What misunderstandings could not be wiped away with a smile? School leader Ning, I'm all alone. I have no family or clan. You can just call me North Moon, Gu Beiyue said indifferently. Ning Qing froze at the words, I have no family or clan. Just as he was about to ask, Gu Beiyue raised a hand to stop him. If the princess is here, then the Shadow Clan is here. With Gu Beiyue saying that, what else was there to ask? This was also why Ning Qing had been searching for the Shadow Clan all these years, why he had always trusted the Shadow Clan so much. North Moon, if you don't mind, my D clan is your Shadow Clan. You can just call me Ning Qing, Ning Qing said seriously. You're too polite, school leader Ning. We're all family. Gu Beiyue still did not change his way of addressing him. He smiled. Apart from being gentle, he seemed like a sly fox. His words were full of hidden meanings. Ning Qing had no time to think about it right now, but once the world was at peace in the future, Ning Qing should be able to think about it. Are the princess and the others well? Ning Qing remembered this very soon. They're all well. Don't worry, school leader Ning. Gu Beiyue immediately told Ning Qing about Jun Yixie's death and the current situation on the battlefield in Northern Li. Of course, he also told him about how Jun Yixie had poisoned Ning Qing to raise poison people. Ning Qing ground his teeth in resentment. It was just a pity that he could not kill Jun Yixie with his own hands. His Highness and the princess are waiting for you to wake up. I'd better get someone to tell them, Gu Beiyue said. Only when he saw Ning Qing nod did Gu Beiyue order the shadow guard to report to him. It had been almost a year since they parted in Black Tower. He still remembered the last time he saw her. She was already one-eyed. Ning Qing sat on the bed with his eyes lowered, waiting silently. Gu Beiyue saw this and said nothing either. He sat beside him. Soon, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi arrived. The moment Han Yunxi walked in, Gu Beiyue stood up. Ning Qing also stood up at almost the same time. However, Gu Beiyue only nodded, while Ning Qing cupped his fists and bowed. Subordinate Ning Qing greets the princess. Han Yunxi stood by the door and looked at this scene. Her heart was filled with emotions. Who would have thought that after going around in circles, she and Ning Qing would still return to this point? She raised her eyebrows and looked at him. Coldly, she said, "Raise your head." Ning Qing did as he was told. He looked straight ahead, his expression calm. Han Yunxi looked at his eyes seriously. One of them was empty, while the other was dark, deep, sharp, and bright. That gaze seemed to be able to see through everything, see through the bustling world and the clamor of people's hearts. I didn't do it on purpose. Han Yunxi said seriously. This subordinate knows. Ning Qing suddenly knelt down and said respectfully, "Fortunately, I still have one eye to receive punishment. This subordinate has been disrespectful to the princess. Please punish me, princess." He had said long ago that he would remember the crime of being disrespectful back then. There would be a day when he would receive punishment. Han Yunxi also remembered this incident and waited for Ning Qing to receive punishment. However, she did not expect that he would receive punishment with his other eye. If both eyes were blind, wouldn't he be crippled? She admitted that back then, she hated Ning Cheng's rudeness to the core and wished that she could blind his eyes with poison. However, she was still angry in her heart today. However, as the princess of Western Qin and as Ning Cheng's master, she could not bear to so cruelly punish a subordinate who had sacrificed everything for Western Qin. If she wanted to cripple him, why would she have risked her life to save him? As the princess, she had too many ways to punish him severely. However, this matter did not only concern her status as the princess, but also the feelings and face of another man, her husband. Han Yunxi eventually looked at Long Fei Yi, only to see that Long Fei Yi was expressionless and did not say a word. Han Yunxi understood that this was a place where official business was conducted. Coldly, she said, "Ning Qing, listen up. I'll abolish your D-clan noble title. Do you accept it?" When she said this, Gu Beiyue and Long Fei Yi were a little surprised. However, Ning Qing nodded without hesitation. This subordinate accepts it wholeheartedly. Han Yunxi continued, "If your Ning family army performs a great service during the northern expedition, this princess will grant you the title of king and general." Abolishing the noble title but promising to grant him the title of king and general. Han Yunxi's move was truly brilliant. Perhaps in her eyes, Ning Qing being blinded in one eye was already punishment enough. She was simply seizing the chance to abolish the D clan's noble title while still winning them over to her side. This was a secret signal to the D, Bai, and Nether clans, as well as the rest of the world. In the future, there would be no more Eastern and Western Qin, nor the 7 noble families. Cloud Realm continent would only have one imperial clan and one empire. Long Fei Ye's lips quirked up into a smile. The woman he'd taken a fancy to wasn't simple at all. This was Western Qin's imperial clan's business, so it had nothing to do with him. As for his personal grudges with Ning Qing, he'd settle them with Ning Qing later. Ning Qing was a smart man. Since the princess had made such a promise, then his D clan would definitely have a place in the empire in the future. Ning Qing kowtowed and kowtowed. Thank you for the princess's favor. Get up. Hurry and recover from your injuries. Without you, the Ning clan's head clan would have been thrown into chaos, Han Yunxi said coldly. Her face was cold, but her heart wasn't cold at all. As soon as Ning Qing lay back on the bed, she went over to take his pulse and check for traces of poison in his body. Then she asked Gu Beiyue how Ning Cheng's injuries were. You were clearly poisoned, so why didn't you say anything? Did you want to die? Han Yunxi asked. This subordinate thought that Ning Jing had told him. Ning Qing replied respectfully. His attitude was a carbon copy of Gu Beiyue's. Han Yunxi wasn't used to it, but she wasn't as courteous to Ning Qing as she was to Gu Beiyue. If Ning Qing wanted to be so respectful, she would let him be. Han Yunxi would never know that Ning Qing didn't say that he was poisoned because he was determined to perish together with Dreamy. He didn't want her to take the risk to save him. Seeing that Ning Qing was basically fine, Han Yunxi sat aside. From the beginning to the end, Long Fei Yi just stayed by her side and didn't say anything. What's Jin Zi's background? Han Yunxi asked. Ning Qing saw Jin Zi subduing White Tiger with his own eyes when he was tied up in Tiger's prison. Gu Beiyue also told him about it just now. He was as surprised as everyone else. A slave trafficker sold a slave from East Wu. At that time, he was very young and didn't have any identification. Ning Qing thought for a moment and said, but there's a clue that we can check. What? Han Yunxi was overjoyed. At that time, he didn't have anything on him, so he might have been searched. If we can find the traffickers who handled him back then, we might be able to find something, Ning Qing said. It had to be said that this was a very troublesome matter. Slave trafficking was often not done first, but through several hands. After such a long time, it wasn't easy to find all the people who handled the trafficking. Moreover, slave traffickers usually sold several people at the same time. Who knew how many people they had trafficked in more than 10 years? It wasn't easy for them to remember clearly what happened back then. However, this was the only way to find a clue. Han Yunxi immediately ordered the servants to return to Myriad Merchant Hall to collect information and investigate. At the same time, she also reported the news that Ning Qing had regained consciousness. Ning Qing was a little hesitant, but he still said, Princess, Jin Zi, isn't a bad person by nature. I'm afraid he had no choice but to kidnap Ning Jing and the others. Back then, it was this subordinate who promised to sell him into slavery. If Ning Qing hadn't mentioned it, everyone would have forgotten about this matter. However, now, no matter who was in the wrong first, who was forced into a corner, and no matter who was good or bad, Han Yunxi only had two things to guard against. The first was what exactly happened between Deacon Jean and Mu Ling. Why did Mu Ling want to marry so decisively? Han Yunxi didn't believe that Mu Ling would have a change of heart for Gu. Mu Ling had said before that even if she had to chase him for a lifetime, she would still chase him until Qi brother grew old and couldn't run anymore. At that time, she would stay by Qi brother's side. If nothing had happened, Mu Ling would never go back on her promise to herself. The other was Deacon Jin's background. If Deacon Jin was really a direct descendant of the Black Clan, then if she let him go, even if he didn't control the Black Clan, Jun Yixie's old subordinates who had escaped would still find him. Han Yunxi wouldn't take the risk when facing someone she didn't understand. she wouldn't bet her sister's life on it. Ning Qing, recuperate well. When the Ning army arrives, you'll be in charge of the Northern Expedition Army. We still have important matters to attend to. Han Yunqi said seriously. Ning Qing knew that the important matter she was talking about was to save Ning Jing. Ning Qing then looked at Long Fei Yi and said seriously, Princess, Your Highness, don't worry. This subordinate won't let you down. After everything was settled, Ning Qing had just woken up and needed to rest. Han Yunqi got up to leave, but Long Fei Yi still sat there without moving. Chapter 1094. Seeing that Long Fei Yi didn't understand, Han Yunqi's eyes flashed with a complicated look. She knew that Long Fei Yi wanted her to deal with Ning Qing in addition to official business. She really didn't know how Long Fei Yi would deal with Ning Qing. She couldn't help but admit that she was a little apprehensive. After all, that was her bottom line, and it was Long Fei Yi's bottom line. Usually, Long Fei Yi would have the heart to kill her if she revealed her feat, let alone, she was worried that Long Fei Yi would really stab Ning Cheng's other eye blind. At this time, Gu Beiyue stood up. Your Highness, Princess, this subordinate still has to prepare some medicinal herbs for use on the road. I'll take my leave first. Gu Beiyue deliberately glanced at Han Yunqi. Only then did Han Yunqi return to her senses. She said lightly, I'll go with you. Let Ling, that lass, help out too. Gu Beiyue seemed to be afraid that Han Yunqi wouldn't leave, so he deliberately gestured for her to leave. Han Yunqi went out with him and personally closed the door for Long Fei Yi and Ning Qing. Princess, let's go. Gu Beiyue didn't try to persuade her. That was all he said. However, since Gu Beiyue had spoken, Han Yunqi knew that she could rest assured. Long Fei Yi probably wouldn't commit murder or arson. She and Gu Beiyue walked towards the rear courtyard. Did you check Ning Cheng's hand again these 2 days? Is there really no way to save it? Could it be that we saw wrongly? Han Yunqi asked in a low voice. When she saw Ning Cheng's movements just now, it was very natural. She couldn't tell that he had a prosthetic hand at all. Han Yunqi sincerely hoped that she and Gu Beiyue had been mistaken that night. During the spring and autumn warring states period, there was a form of torture known as hang, which involved cutting off the legs of the criminal. At that time, there were many people who were tortured, so there were many people who had lost their legs. At that time, someone invented artificial limbs, and there were even peddlers who specialized in selling artificial limbs. There were also traces of artificial limbs in the historical records of Greece and Rome, as well as in archaeological records. Cloud Realm Continent's medical standards far surpassed the historical imperial court she knew. She believed that this continent had artificial limbs, but Ning Cheng's arm was made of real flesh and blood. She couldn't tell at all. Gu Beiyue shook his head helplessly. Princess, it can't be wrong. I examined it again in detail. The tendons of Master Ning's arm were alive, but the bones were dead. They were fake bones, or artificial limbs. Although the curative effect was not good, the doctor was able to keep the flesh and blood of Master Ning's arm so that it would not wither and die. I am unable to help you. Only then did Han Yunqi give up. Forget it, forget it. Gu Beiyue had not only examined Ning Cheng's arm, but Ning Cheng's palm as well. Naturally, he'd seen the needle. But he would never tell anyone about it, no matter who it was. When they reached the rear courtyard, there was no need for Han Yunqi to search. Mu Ling was already picking through the medicinal plants that the Shadow Guard had just delivered. All of them had burns on their bodies, so they naturally had to prepare medicine. Moreover, They were planning to send Ning Qing to the army before heading to the poisoned sex forbidden grounds and use the perplexing butterfly illusion to lure Bai Yanqing out. As meticulous as Gu Beiyue was, he prepared common medicinal ingredients for the trip. "Princess, shall this subordinate take your pulse again?" Gu Beiyue suddenly asked. Han Yunxi wanted to ask a certain question, but Mu Ling was here, so she held back. If Mu Ling a girl who didn't know how to make a fuss, heard that question, Long Feiyi, Gu, and even Jin Zi might find out. Unlike last time, Gu Beiyue let go of Han Yunxi's hand after a while and said, "Princess, you should take advantage of the next 2 days to rest well. If you keep working like this, your body won't be able to take it." "Is there a problem?" Han Yunxi asked. "It's a small problem, a problem with your blood and qi," Gu Beiyue said as he wrote a prescription for Mu Ling to prepare. "When small problems come together, a big problem will come." Mu Ling hadn't been in a good mood recently. She glanced at the prescription and didn't think too much about it. She immediately picked the herbs from the pile and casually said, "What a coincidence. We have all these herbs." Han Yunxi didn't pay attention to this coincidence. She thought to herself that there was no hope for her this month. She'd drink Gu Beiyue's medicine and work hard next month. Long Feiyi hadn't mentioned this problem until now. She didn't know if he was troubled by it. He was probably so busy that he'd forgotten about it. "Princess, what are you thinking about?" Gu Beiyue asked. "Nothing." Han Yunxi snapped back to her senses. She looked at Mu Ling and immediately realized that Mu Ling's eyes were swollen. This girl had cried again. Suddenly, Mu Ling looked up and asked, "Sister, Ning Qing is awake. Can we get Jin Zi to see him?" "Why?" Han Yunxi was puzzled. "Sister, Ning Qing and Jin Zi have been master and servant for many years. They're also friends. Jin Zi has always been thinking about Ning Qing. Just let him see Ning Qing," Mu Ling said seriously. She wasn't lying, because Jin Zi had indeed asked her before. Of course, she still had a lot of selfish motives. She hoped that Ning Qing could help her persuade Jin Zi. "You can take him there later." Han Yunxi agreed readily. How could the silly Ling win against her incomparably shrewd sister? Han Yunxi wanted to use this opportunity to let Ning Qing test Jin Zi and ask him what was going on between Jin Zi and Mu Ling. More importantly, she was still hoping that Ning Qing could get Deacon Jin to help them. Regardless of whether Deacon Jin was a direct descendant of the Black Clan or not, once he revealed his beast-taming technique, who in the Black Clan wouldn't submit to him? If he helped, at least some of Juni Xie's subordinates in Northernly would surrender. This way, the war would be less chaotic. Whether it was the soldiers on both sides, or the herdsmen in the southern part of Northernly, they would all suffer less. Deacon Jin was full of hostility towards them, especially her, the person who had cheated his entire bank. She naturally couldn't show her face. However, Ning Qing could talk nicely with Deacon Jin. Seeing that Han Yunxi agreed, Ling was overjoyed. "I'll go call him now." "Wait, go tonight or tomorrow." Han Yunxi stopped her. Mu Ling didn't understand. Ning Qing wants to rest, right? Your brother-in-law has something to do with him. Han Yunxi thought for a moment, then used a word, "Talk about it in detail." "Oh." Mu Ling thought it was an important matter, so she waited obediently. Gu Beiyue squatted at the side, picking medicinal herbs. He turned back to look at Han Yunxi, and the corners of his mouth hooked up into a faint smile, helpless and doting. How could Long Feiyi talk about it in detail with Ning Qing? A gentleman uses his mouth and not his fists, but a man doesn't talk nonsense. Long Fei Ye's figure flashed forward, and a fist smashed towards Ning Cheng's face, directly sending Ning Cheng flying to the bed. He had wanted to settle the score for Ning Cheng tearing Han Yunxi's clothes for a long, long time. He didn't care how many injuries Ning Cheng had on his body. Daring to bully his woman like that, he had to pay the price. Ning Cheng spat out a mouthful of blood, and supported himself on the bed. He obviously couldn't get up, but he still forced himself to. But as soon as he got up, Long Fei punched him again and sent him sprawling on the ground. Ning Cheng got up again, and Long Fei still beat him. After 3 punches, Ning Cheng was completely lying on the bed, unable to get up. He spat out a large amount of blood, and his already pale face became a terrifying white. "Do you regret it?" Long Fei finally spoke. "Regret?" Ning Cheng honestly said. "This crown prince would rather you collude with Junie Xie." Long Fei looked down at him disdainfully. If Ning Cheng really colluded with Junie Xie, he could happily kill him. There was no need to consider the big picture. Ning Cheng's lips curled into a cold smile. "It's a pity that I don't. In the northern expedition, as long as there is a single defeat, this prince will not be polite." Long Fei said. His meaning was that if Ning Cheng lost a single battle, he would not agree to Han Yunxi's promise of becoming a king. "Is your highness using public office to avenge private wrongs?" Ning Cheng could still laugh. Long Fei generously admitted, "Yes." "All right, this one will remember," Ning Cheng honestly said. Actually, he was very clear that if Long Fei wanted to use public office to avenge private wrongs, he wouldn't be alive today. If he wanted to be the Di family's mortal enemy, the Di family wouldn't have a chance to cooperate with the East Qin army. Even if he wasn't convinced, he still admired Long Fei Ye's magnanimity as an emperor. Although Northern Li's situation was very chaotic and the Northern expedition had a large advantage, how could it be possible to guarantee victory? Unless a miracle happened. Long Fei Ye's goal was very clear. After the battle, he wanted him to disappear from Han Yunxi's sight forever. "Remember to return that purple muslin robe to this prince." Long Fei still remembered this matter. Ning Cheng wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and replied, "All right." Long Fei turned to leave, but Ning Cheng suddenly shouted out, directly calling his name, "Long Fei." Long Fei ignored him. Ning Cheng said, "Long Fei, after the battle, do you dare to drink with me? If you win, I'll leave. If you lose, I'll stay." He wanted to stay, not for anything else, but to give the Di family's brothers who had risked their lives for him. They were there to fight for the country, but the country couldn't be without them. In the Di family, other than those in charge, there were many brothers who silently contributed. Once he left, the Ning family's brothers would disband and scatter to other armies, being ostracized. He wanted to stay, but also for Han Yunxi, for his princess. Eastern and Western Qin cooperated, but in the end, they were divided into factions. The Di family was the princess's only backing. How could he leave without worry? Long Fei stopped and laughed. "Ning Cheng, if you want to drink with this prince, first take down Northern Li. Remember, this prince won't allow you to lose a single battle." This was Long Fei Ye's condition, and also his bottom line. "All right, it's a deal. If I don't lose, please prepare some good wine," Ning Cheng said loudly. When Long Fei left, he couldn't help but vomit several mouthfuls of blood. Long Fei Ye's 3 punches had been so heavy that he'd almost fainted. If he hadn't clenched his left hand so tightly that the needle in his palm would have jolted him awake, he would have fainted long ago. His crippled arm was his loyal dream of reviving his country, his crippled hand was his hidden infatuation. When all his iron-blooded ambitions and tenderness fell on a woman, he had no right to choose. Besides the dead Jun Xia, Uncle Qing, and Bai Yuqiao, as well as Ning'an, who'd always been guarding Tianning's imperial palace, who else in this world knew his heart? Even Han Yunxi only thought he'd offended her in order to find out her identity. Was it a calamity or a redemption, that he could swear loyalty to a woman he wasn't allowed to like? It wasn't a calamity, nor a redemption, but a life. He was willing to accept this fate and risk his life for it. Before Mu Ling could bring Jin Zi over, Ning Qing had already sent someone to fetch it. Chapter 1095. When Jin Zi came to see Ning Qing, he happened to bump into Mu Ling, coming out of Ning Cheng's room. Ever since they moved to the courtyard, Mu Ling had been avoiding Jin Zi. Jin Zi was under house arrest under the Shadow's watch, so he didn't ask to see her. Bumping into him here, Mu Ling immediately avoided his gaze. She didn't know what she was feeling guilty about. Perhaps it was because she didn't fulfill her promise to Jin Zi and help him obtain his indenture contract. Mu Ling avoided Jin Zi's gaze and hurriedly fled. Jin Zi's gaze followed her, but he didn't call out to her. Only when Mu Ling's figure could no longer be seen did Jin Zi knock on the door. Coldly, he said, "Ning Qing, I'm here. Come in." Ning Qing said in a deep voice. The shadow guard was waiting at the door. Jin Zi pushed the door open and entered. He saw that Ning Qing wasn't lying on the bed, but was sitting on a nearby bamboo couch. Jin Zi walked closer and sized him up. He sneered, "I didn't expect you to be so lucky." "Sit," Ning Qing lightly said. Jin Zi sat down. When he was a hostage in Northernly, he didn't have many opportunities to interact with Ning Qing. But Ning Cheng's gaze was enough for him to understand, so he didn't say too much to Jun Xia. He and Ning Qing were master and servant in name, but in reality, they had been friends for nearly 20 years. At the same time, they were also enemies. He used the three-way black market's casino business to open a black money house. He had already earned enough money to redeem himself. Several times, he offered a price 100 times higher than the market price, but Ning Qing refused to let him redeem himself. In this matter, he and Ning Qing were absolute enemies. Glancing at the tea on the table, Jin Zi sneered, "When did Honorable Ning start drinking tea?" For so many years, he had only seen wine on Ning Cheng's table. "Dr. Gu won't give me any alcohol. Why don't you get me 2 jars? Ning Qing smiled. "Brother." Deacon Jean laughed loudly. "Brother, do you still keep your promise to me?" Back at Myriad Merchant Hall, Ning Qing had promised him that as long as he could deal with Mu Ling and take over the Mu clan, he would return the indenture contract to him. If it wasn't for this agreement, how could he, who had never been close to women, take the initiative to provoke Mu Linger, such a stupid girl? If he hadn't taken the initiative to provoke them, how could he have provoked Han Yunxi to stand up for Mu Linger, defraud his bank, and provoke Mu Linger to owe him a huge debt with his gold card? If it weren't for the fact that he was heavily in debt and was being pursued by Kangon Private Bank, would he have colluded with Uncle Qing to kidnap someone? How could he have fallen to such a state? How could he have taken a fancy to Mu Linger? How about we trample northernly with my cavalry? We can attack all the way to Wintercrow. Once we reach Dongwu, I'll ask the princess to give you the slave contract. Jin Zi was a smart person. As soon as he heard the words, Tiger Army, he knew that Ning Qing wanted to use him to form a Tiger Army to rope in Jun Xia's Black Clan subordinates in Northernly and even Wintercrow. If they could rope in Jun Xia's subordinates, the northern expedition would be much easier. Help me pay off my debt to Konggon Bank first, then give me 10 million taels. Otherwise, no deal. Jin Zi immediately laid out his conditions. Ning Qing laughed, okay. Mu Ling didn't know about the agreement between Jin Zi and Ning Qing. For the past few days, she had locked herself in her room. She didn't see Deacon Jean and didn't follow Chi brother in and out like before. She didn't know if Deacon Jean missed her. Gu probably didn't. He basically stayed near Han Yunxi, either watching the sky from the roof or sleeping in a tree. While they were waiting for Deputy General Shue's arrival, Northern Li's political situation changed drastically. A few small cities near the three-way monastery even surrendered on their own accord. Meanwhile, some of Junishia's subordinates abandoned their armies and fled, while others swore to die for revenge. There were even those who set up their own factions and surrendered to the Northernly Emperor. The Northern Dynasty's emperors took the opportunity to recruit many local powers and made preparations to delay the war. As long as they delayed the war until winter, the troops from the south wouldn't be able to acclimatize and the weather would worsen. At that time, there might be a chance for a turnaround. Bailey Yuanlong quickly found out about the Northern Dynasty's emperor's strategy. It was for no other reason than the fact that noble consort Xiao was still favored. The Northern Dynasty's emperor's favored consort was Bailey Yuanlong's daughter and Bailey Mingxiang's older sister. She was originally Bailey Mingxia, but changed her name to Xiao Mingxia and faked her birth. She had been hiding in the Xiao family since young, entering the palace 10 years ago and gaining favor 5 years ago. Long Feiyi prepared to use perplexing butterfly illusion to lure out Bai Yanqing while interrogating Helian Zuixiang, who had been hiding in the Han family for many years. Unfortunately, even when they used to threaten her, she didn't reveal any details about Bai Yanqing. On this day, a secret letter from Northern Li arrived. Long Feiyi glanced at it and hesitated. He didn't say anything for a long time. What's wrong? Han Yunxi asked. Long Feiyi promised that he wouldn't really hurt and would only use Er's name to scare Helian Zuixiang. Han Yunxi didn't ask him to bring back. Helian Zuixiang committed suicide and left you a letter written in blood. Long Feiyi handed over a white handkerchief from the letter. Han Yunxi only frowned. In her opinion, an ingrate like Helian Zuixiang deserved more than death. However, when she saw the words written in blood on the handkerchief, her heart still felt stifled. There were only a few words written in blood. They didn't explain anything, not even an apology. They only begged her not to tell the truth and to continue being Er's older sister. Han Yunxi sneered. She's really smart. She's so sure that I'm worried about Er. Exactly. She knows you very well. This is your weakness. Long Feiyi replied cruelly. Han Yunxi snorted. No, this is my strength. Long Feiyi smiled helplessly. He wanted to take this opportunity to attack this woman, but he couldn't. In fact, this wasn't her strength, but her ability. Kindness and benevolence were indeed good points, but doing good required not only good qualities, but also sufficient ability. So, kindness and kindness were often a kind of ability. Han Yunxi made a prompt decision. Bring Er back. The shadow guard on the side asked in a low voice, Princess, what if the child asks about his mother? Just say, his mother sacrificed herself to save him. No. I don't want to feel guilty. Han Yunxi was resolute. Tell him that the Northernly royal family kidnapped them and wanted his mother to be a spy. His mother would rather die than submit and sacrificed herself. Tell him not to cry, and to be proud of his mother. Long Feiyi looked at Han Yunxi with interest, but didn't say anything. Seeing that he didn't say anything, the shadow guard immediately left to carry out the order. Han Yunxi turned around and realized that Long Feiyi was looking at her. What's wrong? Is it inappropriate? His gaze always made her feel guilty. Give me a son. I want to see how you teach him. Long Fei Yi smiled. He liked his daughter because her daughter resembled her. He wanted his son because he wanted to watch her train his son. Had he never thought of having children because he wanted to have children? Han Yunqi walked over and hugged Long Fei Yi's waist. She looked up and smiled at him. If your son knew that you wanted him because of this, he definitely wouldn't be close to you. Long Fei Yi shook his head. He can only be close to me. In other words, he didn't mean that he wasn't allowed to be close to outsiders, but he wasn't allowed to be close to Han Yunqi. Han Yunqi couldn't wrap her head around it for a moment, because Long Fei Yi's kiss had already landed on her lips. Even Long Fei wanted nothing more than to drown himself in her gentleness and beauty for all eternity. Unfortunately, just as he carried her to the bed, a servant reported at the door, "Your Highness, Princess, Deputy General Xue has arrived and is requesting an audience." Deputy General Xue's speed was unexpectedly fast. Long Fei Yi pressed on Han Yunqi, his expression ugly. Han Yunqi couldn't help but laugh. She said meaningfully, "Your Highness, the bigger picture is more important." Long Fei Yi glared at her and didn't move, wishing everyone a happy Mid-Autumn Festival in advance. August 15th was also Gu Beiyue's birthday. The official WeChat account of Genius Little Poison Consort will send out red packets this evening and tomorrow. Those who want to snatch red packets, please follow the official WeChat account. The account is Tien Kexia Dufiai. Chapter 1096. Long Fei Yi glared at Han Yunqi and Han Yunqi just let him stare as she smiled. Meanwhile, the shadow guard was waiting outside the door. After a while, Long Fei Yi got up and Han Yunqi also got up. She slowly tidied up her clothes and hair and was about to look in the mirror to tidy up her face. Who knew that Long Fei Yi would say, "Bring him to see Ningqing. They haven't seen each other for so long, I'm sure they can chat for the whole night." Yes. The shadow guard obeyed the order and left. Although the shadow guard had left, Long Fei Yi's words were actually for Han Yunqi to hear. One night, Han Yunqi's mouth twitched. Just as she was about to get off the bed, Long Fei Yi leaned over again. He was very close as he said in a deep voice, "Beloved concubine, shall we continue? Deputy General Xue should have a lot to talk about with us. He and Ningqing probably won't talk for the whole night." Han Yunqi said seriously. "On this prince's bed, you're only allowed to call me by my name." Long Fei Yi buried his head in her ear and warned coldly, "This is the last time." Han Yunqi looked at the ceiling and smiled bitterly. How could this guy say something like that? Long Fei Yi's kisses lingered on her neck. Gradually, she couldn't think properly and her consciousness became a mess. Although it was the whole night, he only wanted her once. Compared to the past, it was indescribably gentle and considerate. She leaned against his bare chest and listened to his strong heartbeat. No matter if it was domineering, unyielding, or gentle and considerate, he was always as gentle as water to her after the deed. If she was still awake, he would definitely hug her and chat with her until she fell asleep. "Have you been tired recently?" he asked gently. She just realized that he was afraid that she would be tired. She was indeed tired. She had not stopped cultivating in the poison storage space. Moreover, she did not know if it was because she had been too busy recently, but the moment she rested, she felt a sense of fatigue, like spring sleepiness. "A little," Han Yunqi said faintly. "Go to sleep. You don't have to worry about military matters." Long Fei Yi flipped over and pulled Han Yunqi into his embrace. His slender legs immediately crossed over and straddled her thighs. He was too tall. As long as he wanted to, he could hide her entire body in his embrace. Han Yunxi was quiet for a while. Seeing that Long Fei Yi didn't move, she thought that he was also asleep. Therefore, she carefully reached out and caressed Long Fei Yi's well-defined chest. Long Fei Yi did not sleep at all. He looked down at the person in his arms who was up to mischief. Based on her understanding of him, she knew that even if he was asleep, he would definitely wake up when she moved like this. She knew that he was looking at her. Her hands did not stop moving. Very quickly, she lowered her head and kissed him lightly, lingering. "You've grown bold." Finally, he could not help but say. If this continued, only God knew what he would do. He could withstand all the temptations and threats in this world, but he could not withstand her gentleness. Even if it was just an action, even if it was just a sentence. She really did not dare to look at him. In a low voice, she said, "Long Fei Yi, one more time, okay?" Although she was a little tired, although she was still a little afraid that he would not restrain himself, she had promised to work hard. She wanted to see him dote on his daughter. She also wanted to give birth to a son who was very much like him. "No." Long Fei Yi rejected cruelly. She was about to look up when he said, "2 more times and we can talk about it." Talk about it? Han Yunxi completely surrendered. That night, one could only imagine, the next day, when they met with Deputy General Xue, it was already close to noon. Ning Cheng and Deputy General Xue had indeed chatted for the entire night. They did not only talk about military matters, but also the conflicts between the D clan and the East Qin camp when Ning Cheng was not in the clan. Deputy General Xue had his own selfish motives, but it was not his personal selfishness, but rather the D clan's selfishness. Ning Cheng only listened and did not express any opinions. His attitude made Deputy General Xue unable to understand, so he did not dare to say anything. Deputy General Xue's artillery and 30,000 cavalry were stationed nearby. About 20 li away from here was Heavenly River City. This was the largest city in the western and southern part of Northern Li. It was also Jun Yixie's base. After news of Jun Yixie's death spread, the great general stationed in Heavenly River City, Yuan Guang, immediately united the troops stationed in the western and northern fortresses of Heavenly River City to declare independence. This was the hardest bone to chew in the southern part of Northern Li. If they could take it, it would be easy to take over the southern part of Northern Li before winter arrived. Deputy General Xue had come to bring Ning Cheng back to the army while waiting for the East Qin army to arrive. His and Bailey Yuanlong's plan was to gather their strongest forces and end the battle as quickly as possible. They had to ensure that they could take over the southern part of Northern Li before winter and continue north after that. Currently, the initiative was in their hands. Even if the Northern Dynasty's emperors wanted to delay the war, they did not have the strength to do so. Ning Cheng approved of this strategy and looked forward to meeting Bailey Yuanlong one day. With Ning Cheng present, Deputy General Xue had no right to speak. Although he was very curious as to why the princess and her highness were not personally leading the battle to boost morale, he did not dare say too much. He retreated behind Ning Cheng and stood there. Han Yunxi gave Ning Cheng a bottle of antidote and told him a few things to take note of. The poison in Ning Cheng's body was no longer a problem. With most of the matters taken care of, Han Yunxi and the others did not delay and set out after lunch. Before leaving, Ning Cheng said, "Princess, this subordinate has a presumptuous request." Han Yunxi sat back down and Ning Cheng said seriously, "This subordinate wants to borrow Jin Zi." Han Yunxi did not need to ask. She already knew what Ning Cheng was planning. Ning Cheng understood Deacon Jin very well. She would be completely at ease if she handed Deacon Jean over to him. He's already yours, so there's no need to borrow him. Han Yunxi replied. Then this subordinate will be so bold as to ask the princess to return the indenture contract. Ning Qing respectfully said. A complicated look flashed through Han Yunxi's eyes. She specially ordered someone to bring Jean Zi over. She took out the indenture contract in front of Jean Zi and handed it to Ning Qing. She said to Jean Zi, "Hey, don't ask me for the indenture contract in the future." Jean Zi's face was cold and he did not answer her. Han Yunxi's gaze slowly moved and landed on Mu Ling. She said bluntly, "Ling, let's go." Mu Ling, you're leaving. Jean Zi subconsciously blurted out. The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted it. He had promised to give her a year's time. Since he had already said it and everyone had heard it, he might as well go all out and wait for Mu Ling, to make a choice. Mu Ling, did not expect Jean Zi to ask her this in public. Her first reaction was to look outside. Although she had not been with Chi brother these few days, she knew that Chi brother must be sitting on the roof. She looked outside and did not answer for a long time. Long Fei Yi whispered to Han Yunxi, "I'll wait for you in the carriage." As soon as he went out, Gu Beiyue followed him out silently. Ning Qing also did not stay long and whispered to Deputy General Xue, "Go to the backyard. We have to talk about the weapons." After the master and servant left, only Deacon Jean, Mu Ling, and Han Yunxi were left in the room. If it was in the past, Han Yunxi would have left with Long Fei Yi long ago. However, this matter concerned Mu Ling's life and even her life, so she had to accompany her. She did not say anything and waited quietly with Jean Zi. Although everyone had left, Mu Linger was still looking out the door. She knew that Chi Gij would still be sitting on the roof as long as her big sister didn't leave. She suddenly rushed out and stood in the courtyard and looked up. Sure enough, Chi brother was sitting on the roof with a piece of straw in his mouth and looking ahead. God knows what he was looking at, but Mu Ling knew that he must have heard everything in the room. Seeing her run out, Gu looked down and smiled. "Where's your sister? What are you waiting for? Come out." As soon as he finished speaking, Han Yunxi and Jean Zi both walked out. Gu immediately jumped down and said with a smile, "Poison girl, let's go." Chi brother must have thought that she would stay with Jean Zi, right? No matter how big the wound was, it was nothing compared to that sentence from the other day. TSK, my silly girl has finally grown up and is no longer clingy to Chi brother. Mu Ling ran over and held Gu's arm. "Chi brother, Ling will also go with you." Gu let her hold his arm and patted her head affectionately. He smiled and said, "You're willing to part with your lover now?" Mu Ling did not answer. She just smiled intimately at Gu and deliberately ignored Jean Zi completely. Jean Zi stood there motionlessly and kept looking at her. Mu Ling's attitude was so contradictory that Han Yunxi could not believe that she really liked Jean Zi. "Let's go." She left first. Gu was a heartless person. He only knew that everything would be fine after he made things clear to Mu Ling that night. It was better for this girl to follow him temporarily than to be cheated by Jean Zi, right? He let go of Mu Ling and chased after Han Yunxi, but he left behind a sentence. "Girl, let's go. Chi brother will take you to eat delicious food." Mu Ling never thought that Chi brother was bad. Even if Chi brother did a lot of bad things and cruel things, she would find all kinds of excuses for Chi brother. However, at this moment, she felt that Chi brother was especially bad, very bad. However, she still felt a moment of happiness as if she was possessed. From beginning to end, she did not look at Jean Zi and ran out with Gu. Such a cruel rejection was better than exposing his threat to her sister, wasn't it? She suddenly realized that she was smart. In a year's time, Chi brother would not marry her. Jin Z might also have a change of heart. After all, a year was still so long. They had already gone far away. Jin Z was still standing there, expressionless as he looked out of the courtyard. He was such a proud person. Even though he was a slave, his pride and backbone had never been broken. How could he fall in love with such a lowly woman? Because he could not get her. Would he wake up if he got her? A year was not long. Jin Z murmured, Mu Ling, wait until I get back the slave contract. I must make you fulfill your promise. Jin Z did not know that once they left the manor. Before Gu let go, Mu Ling took the initiative to let go. It had to be said that this made Gu quite surprised. He smiled and said, Little girl, what are you doing? Nothing. What kind of tasty food are you taking me to eat? Mu Linger's smile was just like before, her large eyes sparkling. Along the way, Mu Ling was waiting for Han Yunxi to interrogate her. She was also prepared to say nothing. However, Han Yunxi did not ask her anything. This made her feel uncomfortable. When they arrived at Three-Way Black Market, Ning Qing had already led the army to attack Sky River City. But on the third day after Ning Qing attacked Sky River City, something that shocked everyone and even caused panic happened. Chapter 1097. On the third day after Ning Qing besieged Heavenly River City, a traitor had actually appeared in the Ning family army. Deputy General Shui. As soon as she heard the news, Han Yunxi's first reaction was to think of the deputy general. However, the situation was far more serious than they had imagined. Princess, the traitor is a deputy general surnamed Qin. He took over 10,000 cavalry with him and pledged allegiance to Yuan Guang, who guards Heavenly River City. The Shadow Guard reported honestly. What? Han Yunxi was in disbelief. Only a portion of the Ning family leader's elite troops were from the D clan. Most of them were recruited soldiers. However, they had followed Ning Qing for so many years, so how could they betray him just like that? And they had not betrayed him when Ning Qing was not around, so why did they betray him now? Even a mere pawn could tell that Ning Qing would definitely win the battle in Northern Li. And, as long as Ning Qing won, the entire Ning family army would enjoy endless glory and wealth in the future. Don't tell me this Deputy General Qin was a spy in the first place. Long Feiyi asked in doubt. Your Highness, Yuan Guang opened the city gates and led his troops out of the city. Right now, he and the 10,000 traitors are attacking the Ning family army in a pincer attack. Great General Ning might not necessarily be able to achieve victory in this first battle. The Shadow Guard reported. Whether or not Ning Qing was undefeated was no longer important. What was important was that the Ning family army was in great danger under these circumstances, and if they lost the battle in Heavenly River City, the battle in the south of the Northernly battlefield would definitely drag on until winter. Your Highness, if he's a spy, just what kind of divine spy is he? How can he remain so calm? North Moon furrowed his brows in thought. In my opinion, the Northern Dynasty's emperors don't have that kind of heart. In that moment, a thought flashed through Long Feiye's head, but he rejected it very soon. He ordered coldly, tell Bailey Yuanlong to reinforce them. If we can't take Heavenly River City by the end of this month, I'll hold him accountable. Bailey Yuanlong had 100,000 strong army, a combination of the Ning and Bailey armies. For the northern expedition, Ning Qing was the main general, with Bailey Yuanlong as his deputy. Ning Qing focused on attacking the strategic city of Heavenly River City in the south, while Bailey Yuanlong led the troops north. The army of 100,000 was still in Bailey Yuanlong's hands and had just passed through the three-way battlefield. 50,000 of them were heading west to reinforce Ningqing, 30,000 were heading north, and 20,000 were heading east to coordinate with the naval forces heading north. Even if some of the 30,000 cavalrymen of the Ning family turned traitor, as long as the reinforcements arrived in time, it would not affect the overall situation. Long Fei Yi and the others were shocked that the Ning family army could have a spy in their midst. What about the other armies? Not long after the Shadow Guard left, a familiar face rushed in. It was none other than Chu Shifeng. As soon as he recovered, he returned to the three-way black market with Bailey Mingxiang. At the same time, he brought back a piece of bad news. When did you come back? Han Yunxi was quite surprised. Your Highness, Princess, this subordinate just arrived. Something's happened in Western Zhou. More than half of the Chu clan troops have turned traitor and colluded with two Western Zhou armies. 3 days ago, they started fighting with Chu Tianyin at the borders. As soon as Chu Tianyin finished speaking, the Shadow Guard arrived with an urgent message. Your Highness, an urgent message from the Chu clan. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi exchanged glances. Gu Beiyue finally stood up as well. Long Fei Yi opened the letter and saw that it was written by Chu Tianyin. It described exactly what Chu Shifeng had come to report. Chu Tianyin didn't have enough troops to fight back against the Western Zhou army and the traitors. He had retreated all the way to the border between Tianning and Western Zhou to ask for help, but Tianning's only troops stationed there had turned against him and joined forces with the Western Zhou army in a pincer attack. Chu Tianning's letter read like this: Your Highness, Princess, by the time you see this letter, my Chu clan troops will have been completely annihilated. This one will keep my promise and pledge my loyalty to the end. I hope your Highness will keep your word and protect my father and uncle from death. Both the Chu clan troops and Tianning's garrison troops have turned traitor. This one boldly asks your Highness and Princess to be on guard against the Tian and Mu family. The Mu family. Han Yunxi couldn't believe it. What did Chu Tianyin mean by this? Was he guessing that these traitors were all members of the Mu family? How was that possible? If General Mu's estate had such skills, then the Tianan wouldn't be the Tianan of today. There were spies in the Chu, Ning, and Tianning's garrison troops stationed at the borders. Moreover, they were all high-ranking military officers who could command large numbers of troops. What kind of skill was this? It was enough to ascend to the heavens. This was equivalent to controlling the forces of both Eastern and Western Qin. Long Fei Yi was surprised for the first time in his life. How could Gu Beiyue not be surprised? Long Fei Yi slowly turned his head to see Gu Beiyue looking over as well. The Li clan. Long Fei Yi muttered. It's only them. Gu Beiyue was very certain. Besides the Li clan, there was no one else in the world who had such skills. The Li clan was skilled in the art of war. Even if General Mu changed his mind and wanted to proclaim himself emperor, he wouldn't have waited until now. The best time for the Li clan to raise their troops would be when Jun Yixia was still alive. If that happened, the armies of Eastern and Western Qin would face the threat of Northern Li and the rebel army at the same time. When Han Yunxi recalled Mu Qingwu's disappearance, she couldn't help but wonder if the Li clan had been threatened by Bai Yanqing. Princess, the young general wasn't kidnapped during the 100 Poison Sect incident, Gu Beiyue reminded her. No matter what ties the Mu family had with Bai Yanqing, Long Fei Yi and the rest had no choice but to act now that the rebels were everywhere. Long Fei Yi looked at Han Yunxi and said, We have to lead the troops ourselves. We can't let others take advantage of us. If they continued to head to the poison sect's forbidden grounds and left the fighting to their subordinates, they might even lose the south, much less the central regions. Ning Qing wouldn't be able to live without worries then. After all, if General Mu wanted to raise his troops, he must have more chips in his hands than they could see. Right now, Long Fei Ye's most urgent task was to personally take control of Bailey Yuanlong's 100,000 soldiers. He had to reappoint all of the lieutenants and high-ranking officers to ensure that nothing happened to the army. If something happened to the army, they would be in deep trouble. Han Yunxi was worried about the same thing. Although she was unwilling, she still nodded. All right. Send someone to inform Tangli. Soon, the news reached the Tang sect in Sky River City. Long Fei Yi, Han Yunxi, Gu Beiyue, and Gu didn't waste a moment. They immediately set off for Three-Way Pass. Mu Ling volunteered to be a doctor in the army, and Han Yunxi agreed. Who knew that the very night they arrived, the army of 100,000 soldiers rebelled? Two groups of soldiers were involved in the rebellion. One was the 5,000 elite troops sent to support Ning Qing, while the other was the 20,000 troops prepared to head north to attack the Northern Dynasty's emperors. At the same time, the troops stationed at the border between Tianning and Tianan went missing, allowing General Mu to attack Tianning's borders that very night. Some of the troops stationed in the central regions in Jiangnan also rebelled, muttering that the south-central regions wanted to break away from eastern and western Qin's rule and become their own country. That night, the flames of war rose in all four corners of Cloud Realm continent. Long Fei Ye's teacup crashed to the ground as silence filled the tent. The Li clan wants to throw the world into chaos. Long Fei Yi said. He could see clearly now that the Li clan had no intentions of opposing eastern and western Qin, much less fighting for dominance over Cloud Realm continent. They only wanted to stop them from unifying the continent and throwing it into chaos. Otherwise, why would the south-central regions want independence? Why else would Ning Qing and Bailey Yuanlong's rebel troops surrender to Northern Li instead of turning on them directly? Gu Beiyue was currently looking at a map on the wall. He leaned over and pointed at it as he said, General Mu made a good move. Once the south-central regions fall into chaos, half of Cloud Realm continent will fall into chaos. Moreover, we won't be able to hand in grain this autumn. Our reserves are limited. Even if Tianning's east and west borders fall, western Zhou and Tianan's forces are limited. They won't be able to swallow up Tianning in a short period of time. Long Fei Yi could see the clues as well. There were already rebel troops in the 100,000-strong army that had suffered losses. If they sent too few troops south, they'd lose too many men and be unable to end the battles in Northern Li quickly. If they sent too few men, they'd be unable to end the battles in Tianning. As a result, all of Cloud Realm continent would be embroiled in battles in the east, west, north, and south. Heaven knows how long the chaos would last. This isn't the Li clan's intention, but Bai Yanqing's. Han Yunxi said. Gu Beiyue said, Princess, Your Highness, we have no choice but to. Chapter 1098. We have no choice but to give up on Northern Li, Gu Beiyue concluded. Even if the Li clan had caused chaos in Cloud Realm continent, Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi wouldn't lose with their resources. As long as they were willing to give up on Northern Li for now and send their troops south to deal with the rebels and the Li clan, they would be able to quell the chaos. As for Northern Li, they could only leave Ning Qing here to maintain order so that Ning Qing could keep them safe for now. What if the southern armies of Northern Li make peace with the Northern Dynasty's emperors? Then won't we be attacked from two sides? Han Yunxi asked cautiously. There was no such thing as an eternal alliance or an eternal enemy in this world. There were only eternal interests. Perhaps this saying was too utilitarian, but it was very appropriate when it came to national interests. Perhaps the southern powers wouldn't make peace with the northern dynasty's emperors, but it was impossible to guarantee that the northern dynasty's emperors would make peace with them on their own accord. Han Yunxi's considerations were thorough, but Long Feiyi reassured her. They won't. Even if the northern dynasty's emperors have such intentions, noble consort Xiao will be able to convince them. Since Long Feiyi was so certain, Han Yunxi stopped worrying. As long as the northern and southern sides of Northern Li didn't join forces, Ning Cheng's troops and some reinforcements would be enough to stop the cavalry from heading south. Han Yunxi dearly hoped that Ning Qing could convince Jin Zi to help. As long as Jin Zi could subdue the Black Clan's old subordinates, they'd be more at ease. Long Feiyi stood with his hands behind his back as he stared at the map in silence. Then he issued his first order. Deploy 10,000 troops to guard the area. The rest will follow this crown prince to the south. Actually, everyone assumed that Long Feiyi wouldn't leave any troops for Ningqing, but he really didn't use his position to avenge private wrongs. It took them a day to reorganize their forces. Long Feiyi stayed up all night to make new arrangements for the garrisons in the central and southern regions. Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue both accompanied him in making plans. Han Yunxi assigned a group of female mercenaries from the City of Daughters to form a small elite force for them to dispatch in times of emergency. Gu was not interested in these things at all. He could not sleep either. He sat by the side and listened to their discussion. Finally, he threw out a sentence. He said, "Poison lass, if worst comes to worst, we can form an army of poison corpses and kill our way to Tianan." The first half of Gu's words were absurd, but the second half hit the nail on the head. As the saying goes, to catch bandits, first catch the ringleader. The key to quelling this rebellion was to take down Tianan. To be exact, it was to take down General Mu's mansion. Everyone automatically ignored the first half of Gu's words. Gu Beiyue said seriously, "Bai Yanqing might be in Tianan, Miss Jing and the others might also be in Tianan, that's good. It saves us the trouble of looking everywhere." Han Yunxi said coldly. Long Fei's target in the south was Tianan. When Tianan fell into civil strife, he had left in the middle of the night to officially start a war to regain their former glory. Unexpectedly, he was going to fight his way back in person. Long Feiyi looked at Gu Beiyue and Han Yunxi and said in a low voice, "Order a few of the deputy generals to lead the troops directly to Zhongshan County. There are only 4 of us in Tianan. We'll kill our way there. How about it?" He didn't care who had Mu Qingguo. He wanted General Mu's life. Han Yunxi and Gu Beiyue were stunned. They were very surprised. Why didn't they think of this? Great. Gu laughed. Long Feiyi, I'll go with you. It's a good idea. We can pretend to transfer troops and mislead the enemy. Gu Beiyue smiled. Han Yunxi was even more straightforward. We can leave at any time. Before leaving, Han Yunxi went to the military medical camp and called Mu Ling out. She whispered, "Ling they'll leave tonight. They're sending troops tonight." Mu Ling was very puzzled. Didn't they say that they would lead the troops to the south tomorrow? Han Yunxi whispered a few words in her ear. She immediately knew what was going on. "Sister, will I be a burden to you if I go?" Mu Ling asked seriously. "Yes," Han Yunxi answered truthfully. Although it was cruel, it was still better than bringing her along as a burden and dragging everyone down, right? Mu Ling smiled. "That's good. I can stay away from Qi brother." "What's wrong with you? If you don't tell me, don't call me sister in the future." Han Yunxi wasn't angry. She was helpless. She had asked no less than 10 times about Deacon Jean, but Mu Ling just wouldn't tell the truth. Sister, Chi brother, rejected me that night. Mu Ling lowered her head. Han Yunqi was very surprised. Mu Ling continued, Sister, since Chi brother rejected me, I won't pester him in the future. But I can still continue to like him, right? Han Yunqi listened for a long time but still didn't get the main point. She held Mu Ling's hand and said seriously, I can't interfere in the matter between you and Chi brother. That's your own business. But you have to tell me what's going on between you and Jean Zi. You want to marry him 1 minute, then leave the next. Why? Did he threaten you? Did he scare you? No. Mu Ling denied it. I just wanted to use him to anger Chi brother, and then that happened. Mu Ling didn't dare to meet Han Yunqi's eyes. She pushed Han Yunqi aside and said, let's go, let's go. Do you think I'm so easy to scare? Although she still didn't feel at ease, at least she had an explanation. Han Yunqi instructed, later, Chu Shifeng and Bailey Mingxiang will come to pick you up. You two will secretly leave for the Tang clan. I don't want to. Mu Ling refused immediately. Then where else do you want to go? Han Yunqi narrowed her eyes. If they left, Mu Ling wouldn't be able to stay in the barracks with that temper of hers. They'd finally found her, so how could she set her heart at ease if she didn't settle her down? I'll just stay in the barracks and not go anywhere. I'll wait for your good news. Mu Ling explained hastily. I received Lady Tang's letter a few days ago. Little Tang is shy with strangers and cries at night. Ling for Ning Jing's sake, you should go. Han Yunqi's tone grew serious. Mu Ling couldn't refuse her words. She asked urgently, when will Chu Shifeng and the rest arrive? How long will it take to get to the Tang clan from here? Actually, Mu Ling had underestimated little Tang. Perhaps it was because she'd experienced so many dangers since birth that she developed excellent adaptability. Little Tang was living very well at the Tang clan. She had a bunch of people to play with her every day, and a pair of people to guard her at night. She'd long adapted to life in the Tang clan and didn't need Mu Ling to worry about her at all. Just like that, Mu Ling was tricked by Han Yunqi and obediently waited in the barracks for Chu Shifeng and Bailey Mingxiang to pick her up. That night, Long Fei Ye's military orders were sent to various regions. The 4 of them secretly left the barracks and headed southeast towards Tianan. The next day, the 70,000-strong army stationed outside Three-Way Pass split into 2 groups. One group went to support Ningqing, while the other headed south. A few days later, the central and southern regions received Long Fei Ye's orders and adjusted their strategies to coordinate with the army heading south. After passing through Three-Way Pass, only 15,000 soldiers remained within Tianing borders to join forces with Tianing's eastern and western garrisons to resist Western Zhou and Tian'an's invasion. The 50,000-strong army didn't stop at all, but headed straight for the central regions and Jiangnan. The central regions and Jiangnan were Cloud Realm Continent's wealthiest and most livable places. Naturally, they needed to be heavily guarded. At the same time, Han Yunqi suggested that the various prefectures in the central and southern regions form their own militia. Various financial groups contributed money and grain to resist the rebel army. This method worked because Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi had left a good impression on the people of the central and southern regions during their disaster relief efforts. They were also respected by the people because of their status as members of the imperial clan. The Li clan had the hearts of the troops, while Long Fei Yi and Han Yunqi had the hearts of the people. How could a man with the hearts of the troops fight against a man with the hearts of the people? The army was the people, too. The 50,000-strong army had just reached the central regions and hadn't even moved to Jiangnan when good news arrived. The militia had repelled the rebel army's attack on a major grain supply area and cut off many of the rebel army's rations. Tianning and the 3 central prefectures were in a more serious situation. Although the two armies hadn't officially clashed yet, experienced soldiers could tell that these two regions would be locked in a protracted war. This was something that Han Yunxi and Long Feiyi didn't want to see. Unexpectedly, Ningqing actually sent the 10,000 soldiers Long Feiyi had sent south to reinforce Tianning. Nobody knew if the Long Feiyi and Ningcheng's agreement to never lose a battle still counted in the face of such a situation. Whether it counted or not, Ningqing wasn't an impulsive man. He'd only returned the 10,000 soldiers to Long Feiyi because Jin Zi had formed a tiger army to prove his status as a direct descendant of the Black Clan. Moreover, he declared the Black Clan's loyalty to Western Qin's imperial clan. Jin Zi had dragged the tiger army around the battlefield so that all of northern Li's southern regions knew about it. Although not all of the Black Clan's old subordinates had surrendered, more than half of them had. By the time they received the news, Long Feiyi and the rest had already been hiding in Tian'an territory for several days. They had secretly directed the battles in Tianning, the central and southern regions while keeping tabs on General Mu's estate, waiting for an opportunity to make a move. When Ningcheng's news arrived, the 4 of them had their own ideas. TSK, this Jin Zi is incredible. I've really underestimated him, Goose said with interest. Han Yunxi didn't say anything, but she was secretly laughing at Ningcheng's methods. Jin Zi's declaration that the Black Clan would be loyal to Western Qin's imperial clan must have been at Ningcheng's request. By doing this, he could help Western Qin subdue the Black Clan, and slap Long Feiyi in the face. After all, the Black Clan had once been loyal to East Qin. Princess, whether or not Jin Zi is a descendant of the Black Clan, it'll be a great benefit if we can subdue him for our own use. Gu Beiyue had seen through the trick and smiled as he evaluated the situation. Long Feiyi laughed coldly. Since he subdued the Black Clan, then this crown prince will wait to see him conquer Northern Li. No one knew that Ningcheng's letter had included a note for Long Feiyi. It was written clearly that no matter what happened in Northern Li, his agreement with Long Feiyi wouldn't change. Naturally, Long Fei would have to wait and see. 2 days later, the Shadow Guard confirmed that General Mu was still living in Tian'an's imperial city. As for Bai Yanqing, there was still no news. Han Yunxi's group didn't hesitate to set out for Tian'an's imperial city. But they hadn't gone far before bad news spread to all parts of Cloud Realm continent overnight, especially the central regions and Jiangnan. Since the news had spread so quickly, it must have been prepared beforehand and sent people to spread the news. The bad news was that General Mu had personally led 10,000 soldiers to guard Tian'an's imperial city and sealed it off. No one was allowed to enter or leave, leaving 30,000 civilians trapped inside. General Mu called out to Han Yunxi from afar, saying he wanted to make a deal with Han Yunxi. In short, in the south-central region, it could be said that the army and people were of one mind to fight against the enemy. It was all because of the trust, love, and respect that the people had for Long Feiyi and Han Yunxi. Under these circumstances, if Han Yunxi refused General Mu's request, it would be the same as cutting off the livelihood of the Tian'an citizens in front of everyone. They were all innocent people who originally belonged to the same country as Tian'an, so the citizens of the south-central region didn't feel much hatred or resentment towards the Tian'an imperial clan. If Han Yunxi refused, how would the people look at her? How would they trust her again? Moreover, General Mu's conditions didn't only include the 30,000 citizens of the Tianan imperial capital, but also included stopping the surrenders and stopping the chaos in the four directions. If Han Yunxi refused, it would be the same as rejecting the rebel army surrender and insisting on fighting. As soon as the news spread, many people began to suspect that the chaos in the four directions was caused by Han Yunxi's personal grudges. If Han Yunxi refused, who knew what kind of rumors would spread? Not only would Han Yunxi lose the hearts of the people, but even Han Yunxi's husband, Long Feiyi, would lose the hearts of the people as well. This was the so-called flattery to kill. This was Han Yunxi's dilemma. The four of them were very quiet. Long Feiyi, Gu Beiwe, and Gu were all looking at Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi smiled to herself, feeling a little awkward under their stares. She teased, I suddenly remembered a saying. If I don't enter hell, who will? She wanted to make a joke, but the three of them were all serious and unsmiling. She was resentful and was about to discuss seriously when Gu suddenly grabbed her hand. Let's go. Who cares if it's 30,000 or 300,000? Let go. As Long Feiyi shouted angrily, he had already grabbed Gu's wrist and almost broke Gu's wrist. However, Gu stubbornly refused to let go. He frowned at Long Feiyi and questioned, why? Are you taking her away? Where are you taking her? What does that have to do with you? Long Feiyi retorted angrily. Not only did he not loosen his grip, he even increased it. Gu immediately channeled his energy to resist, and Long Feiyi followed suit. The two men were at loggerheads just like that. Gu grabbed Han Yunxi's hand tightly. If it wasn't for the fact that he was afraid of hurting Han Yunxi's wrist, Long Feiyi would have already crippled Gu's hand. The two men glared at each other angrily, neither of them willing to back down. There had been countless times when Gu had given in, regardless of whether he could win or not. But this time, he didn't have the slightest intention of giving in. Suddenly, his other hand stretched out, wanting to grab Han Yunxi's other hand. Long Feiyi's hand was quick and stopped him, squeezing Gu's wrist until it cracked. Are you letting go or not? The veins on Long Feiyi's forehead were popping out, his anger overflowing to the heavens. Only God knew if he was angry at Gu, angry at General Mu, or angry at himself. Gu's anger wasn't any less than his. He roared at Long Feiyi, where are you taking her? Where are you going? Where are you going? He stopped pulling and looked into Long Feiyi's eyes coldly, asking word by word, Tian, and Imperial, City, right? The moment his voice fell, Long Feiyi suddenly lifted his leg and viciously kicked Gu's abdomen. In an instant, Gu spat out a mouthful of blood. But he still stubbornly stared at Long Feiyi, saying word by word, unless I die, otherwise, don't think about it. Enough. Han Yunxi was so angry that she couldn't say anything, her face was pale white. Was there any meaning to this internal argument? It was a pity that no matter how loudly she shouted, Long Feiyi and Gu ignored her. On this matter, these two fellows were terrifyingly overbearing. This crown prince will never let her take the risk. Long Feiyi angrily replied Gu. But who knew that Gu still wouldn't let go? He slowly looked at Han Yunxi and muttered, Poison lass, are you obedient? He was always joking around, but he understood her too well. He knew that Long Feiyi wouldn't be able to convince her. As expected, Han Yunxi didn't reply. Long Fei looked towards her as well. He let go of Gu Qixiao's hands and walked closer to pull her into his arms. In a low voice, he begged, Be good and listen to me, all right? Listen to what? Where do you want me to go? You want me to be a coward? You want me to hide for the rest of my life? Han Yunxi smiled faintly. It's just being a hostage. I won't die. When the time comes, I might even be able to see Bai Yanqing. Then he'll come and save me. Long Fei Yi and Gu didn't speak. Gu let go of her hand. Gu Beiyue stood at the side and watched from the start. He didn't move or speak, just watched silently. He was the calmest and the most rational. Han Yunxi looked at him and said seriously, Gu Beiyue, what do you think I should choose? Gu Beiyue didn't say anything for a long time. In the end, he looked at the moon in the sky. It was the 15th day of the month. The moon was round, but it was a lone moon. Princess, this subordinate's responsibility is to ensure your safety. This subordinate is only responsible for accompanying you in life and death. This subordinate has no right to make a choice for the princess. His attitude was still respectful, but the helplessness in his eyes was enough to break anyone's heart. For the first time, Sir Northman's true emotions were written all over his eyes and face. He felt very terrible. Not only was Han Yunxi helpless against Long Fei Yi, but she was also helpless against Gu and Gu Beiyue. In the end, she said helplessly, all right, let's look at the situation first before coming up with a plan. I'm not going to court death. With that, the three of them finally recovered some rationality. That night, they camped out in the forest to the side. Along the way, Gu could always provoke the taciturn Long Fei Yi into arguing with him. Gu Beiyue was the quietest of them all. However, on this night, even Gu was quiet. They lay on the grass, gazing at the moon in the sky. They were silent, immersed in each other's thoughts. Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi interlocked their fingers very, very tightly. What would the situation be like tomorrow? Right now, there was another person who was thinking about the moon. That was Ning Qing, who was far away outside Heavenly River City. Heavenly River City was about to fall, but he was in no mood at all. He was hesitating. He was hesitating over whether he should leave the army and head south to see Han Yunxi. However, he couldn't find any reason to see her, much less the right to persuade her. He was a subject, while she was a monarch. He never thought that there'd come a day when he'd place all his hopes on Long Fei, but this time he sincerely hoped that Long Fei could stop Han Yunxi. Why didn't the Li clan want Long Fei Yi, but Han Yunxi instead? Why did the rise and fall of the world have to be shouldered by a single woman? If he could do it all over again, he'd pay any price to destroy Tianan and kill Mu Yuanbua. Unfortunately, it was too late. The next day, all of the rebel armies stopped fighting, but Tianan's General Mu's estate threw out 100 corpses from Tianan's imperial city to hasten Han Yunxi's reply. News of this spread throughout Cloud Realm continent as well. If yesterday everyone was denouncing the Li clan for their cruelty, today everyone's focus was on Han Yunxi. It was as if Han Yunxi was even more hateful than General Mu if she didn't agree. It was as if those 100 corpses weren't killed by General Mu, but by Han Yunxi. I have to go. I'll go right now. Han Yunxi was very decisive. She wasn't afraid, but she was reluctant to part with them. She hid all of this in her heart. Unlike yesterday's explosive temper, Long Fei Yi and Gu were unusually quiet. Gu Beiyue's head was bowed, making it impossible to see his expression. If you guys aren't saying anything, I'll take it as you've agreed. Han Yunxi said seriously. The three of them really didn't say anything, but when Han Yunxi was about to leave, Long Fei Yi and Gu both reached out to stop her. What should they do? Chapter 1100. What should they do in such a predicament? Long Fei Yi and Gu each held an arm in front of Han Yunxi. Han Yunxi turned helplessly to Gu Beiyue and asked, Gu Beiyue, tell Long Feiyi which choice is the right one. Back then, when Long Feiyi had to choose between postponing the northern expedition, Gu Beiyue had said that there was no such thing as cruelty. There was only right and wrong, and the path of an emperor was one of choice. The northern expedition couldn't be considered the path of an emperor, but what lay before them now was the true path of an emperor. If they gave up, they wouldn't just lose the world at their fingertips, but also the people's hearts. Perhaps Gu Beiyue would be as calm and rational as ever if it were anyone else, but this time he was facing Han Yunshi. Gu Beiyue wasn't a god. How could he be so cruel and calm? Gu Beiyue didn't say anything. He'd already said what he needed to say. Poison lass, let's go. Leave this damned place. I've already made some inquiries. Behind the Winter Crow tribe's snowy mountains is the Ice Sea, and behind the Ice Sea is a new continent. Let's go, we'll leave Cloud Realm together. Gu said loudly, send someone to spread the news right now. Say we're all dead and gone. Mu Buiyuan can do whatever he wants. This world can be given to whoever wants it. Right now, Gu Qishao looked like a willful child who was indulging in wild fantasies. But Long Feiyi actually listened to him. Alright, let's go right away. Han Yunshi shook her head. Long Feiyi, are you going to abandon the world? Don't mention Northernly, this crown prince doesn't even want the entire Cloud Realm. Long Feiyi said. Back then, when he said to Jun Xia that Han Yunshi will not be exchanged for the world, he was not joking, nor was he trying to deceive Jun Xia. Forget about Northernly, he wouldn't even trade all of Cloud Realm continent for Han Yunshi's life. I don't want to destroy your empire, nor do I want to destroy you and make you a deserter. Han Yunshi said coldly, I, Han Yunshi, am not a deserter. My husband is definitely not a deserter. What kind of wicked idea did Gu come up with? He actually wanted them to escape. The world was big, but the human heart was only that big. They might be able to escape Cloud Realm continent, but could they escape her heart? Even if he could escape the mouths of the people of the world, could he escape the condemnation of the historians? Han Yunshi didn't care how others saw her, let alone how historians wrote about her. However, she cared about how the world viewed Long Feiyi. She cared about how the historians wrote about Long Feiyi. He was different from her. She was nothing more than a lonely soul who transmigrated 3,000 years ago. She only had him and a group of close friends who had gone through fire and water with her. With him, they were enough. Have him prepare well and come out of the city to welcome us. After hearing Long Feiyi's words, Han Yunshi recovered her wits and understood Long Feiyi's countermeasure. Gu didn't care what considerations they had in mind. Mo Xie's sword spirit glowed with a cold light in his hand. He wouldn't be able to quench his pent-up anger until he slaughtered Mu Buiyuan. The Tianing barracks were about half a month's journey away from the Tian and Imperial City. If they were fast, it would only take them a day and a night to get there. Since Mu Buiyuan wanted to use the people of the world to kill Han Yunshi, then they would beat him at his own game and win the hearts of the people once more. The Shadow Guard was about to leave and Gu Beiyue called him back and whispered something into his ear. It wasn't clear what he said, but the Shadow Guard earnestly memorized it and repeated it in a low voice. It was a long time before he left. The dispute didn't affect Long Feiyi and Han Yunshi at all. In fact, it made them understand each other's hearts even more. After discussing their countermeasure, they continued on their journey. As expected, they secretly arrived at the outskirts of the Tian and Imperial City by the evening of the next day. At the same time, the Tianing barracks were sending a letter to Mu Buiyuan, as well as a letter in Long Feiyi's name. The letter first expressed Long Feiyi's deep love for Han Yunshi, as well as his desire to join hands with the Princess of Western Qin to create a new era of peace for the great Qin Empire and benefit the people of Cloud Realm. Then it elaborated on the Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi's various considerations and choices in the face of the threat from the Li clan's Mu family. Finally, it promised not only to the common people, but also to the soldiers participating in the war that Han Yunxi was willing to personally visit the Tian and imperial city and exchange her life for Cloud Realm's peace. Gu Beiyue had sent the Shadow Guard to deliver this letter. Although it was hypocritical and deliberately stirring up emotions, it was still the truth. If not for the fact that he cared for the common people, how could Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi ever be threatened and restrained? In terms of repaying debts of gratitude and enmity, Long Fei Yi didn't lose to Gu in any way. Once the letter was announced, it spread to every corner of Cloud Realm continent within a few days. It wasn't just the south-central regions, Tianning, Northern Li, Western Zhou, and Tian and commoners all cheered Long Fei Yi and Han Yunxi on their behalf. At the same time, they denounced the Li clan's Mu family. Many commoners even formed militias to join the army. Within a few days, all of Cloud Realm continent was in an uproar. The Li clan's Mu family became the target of public criticism. Everywhere was filled with complaints against the Li clan's Mu family. The common people all said that as long as Mu Buiyuan dared to harm a hair on Han Yunxi's head, the world wouldn't let the Mu family off so easily. Long Fei Ye's group of 4 hid near the Tian and imperial capital to observe the situation and wait for an opportunity to strike. They never expected things to turn out like this. They only wanted to beat the Li clan at their own game, but never expected the Li clan's Mu family to incur the wrath of the masses. Their scouts brought back news that the commoners in the cities near the Tian and imperial capital were already rioting. The commoners in other places were rioting as well. They stopped trying to stop the militias from joining the war, but rushed to the rebel camps on their own accord. What did it mean when people said that the world was in chaos? This was true chaos. Long Fei Ye's group wasn't in a rush to launch a sneak attack, but could simply sit back and watch the situation unfold. The Tian and imperial capital was sealed off from news. Otherwise, the commoners would have risen up in revolt long ago. Today, a piece of excellent news arrived from Jiangnan. A rebel army couldn't withstand the pressure and surrendered. Not only did they surrender, but they also scolded the Li clan's Mu family for being unrighteous and unworthy of leading the army. As soon as the news came out, several rebel armies immediately surrendered. Han Yunxi and the others didn't even have to show their faces. They could win without a fight. Faced with this kind of pressure, Mu Buiyuan didn't dare to kill the commoners in the Tian and imperial capital. He had already been sleepless for several days. He didn't shut himself in the study of General Mu's residence and let the Li clan's elders knock on the door, persuade, and even threaten him. Yes, General Mu had put Long Tianma under house arrest and threatened Han Yunxi with massacring the entire city. This had already made the elders very unhappy. The Li clan had become the target of condemnation and public enemy number 1. The Li clan's elders, who lived in seclusion and didn't care about the secular world, could no longer sit still. The Li clan was good at war, but they were the ones who hated war the most. They hated war the most. Only those who had been on the battlefield and seen rivers of blood and corpses would know what war was. Only then would they hate and fear war. The Li clan was like this. The Li clan's art of war wasn't talent. It was the accumulated experience of generations of Li clan descendants charging and breaking through enemy lines on the battlefield, licking their blades and drinking blood, risking their lives. The Li clan's art of war wasn't just a military book. It was a history of the Li clan's blood, sweat, and tears. The Li clan hated war, so they were neutral. That was why when the Qin Empire's civil war was fought, both Eastern and Western Qin suffered great losses. The Li clan had 100,000 soldiers, but they didn't side with either side. They didn't betray either side and declare themselves king. Instead, they chose to disband the army, live in seclusion, and disappear. Why did General Mood do this? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.